UK, based on the Master Secret series, which basically translates as True Justice. And this is part 2 of this natural law and the concepts of true justice class, which we're getting into today. So welcome everybody. And as I say, I'm going to move through maybe a very short overview of part 1 and then get into the stuff that we can talk about today in part 2, which is focused more around bottom 2 areas, as I say, that we covered in the top 2 in part 1. If you want to get access to part 1, then please refer to our YouTube channel. Search on YouTube, All Eyes on Egypt, with an I, not a Y, Midlands and the North.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Nababkak. I'm not hearing you very well. I can hear the Om chant, but I'm not hearing you that great at all.
Okay, this is an issue with the sound. Okay. Just bear with me. Is that any better?
Yes, it certainly is.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just keep letting me know if there's a problem and we'll adjust accordingly. Right. Okay.
It could probably go up a little more if there's any more gain that you've got there. It is better than it was.
Is that better?
That is.
Okay. All right. No, appreciate that. Okay. So basically, let's say we're getting into the part 2 of this class today. So we'll press on, and I'll just give you a brief introduction of the class and the setup that we're using on the Zoom platform. So, interesting enough, let's just do a sound check. So, let's just run one of the polls that we're seeing here. So, I'm just going to launch a poll. So, can you hear my voice clearly? And can you hear me clearly over the background music? So, those are 2 questions there to be answered. So I'll give you a minute to respond to that. Okay, so a bit of a mixed bag. I think looks like, as the person who said they cannot hear me properly, if you can just give that feedback in the chat, and maybe able to sort that issue out. A number of people haven't answered. So using polls on the Zoom platform allows us to get a certain level of interaction. So you need to learn how to use that if you want to participate fully. If you're on a mobile phone, sometimes you have to swipe your screen to see what is going on in that regard. So please, if the voice feedback is not clear, then just moderators, you'll have to keep feeding back, and then yeah, we'll try and see what we can do to make that better. Okay, can you check that you can see the presentation screen? Okay, this is the second question that we're asking today. Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds to answer that. Okay, appreciate the feedback there. So it seems to be that's okay for the majority of those on the actual platform itself. So I'm going to end the polling now on that. Okay, so just to start off the class in fashion, paying respect to our ancestors, our culture, and to invoke positive thinking as we align ourselves with our ancestors as we're teaching this doctrine of Wu-Sabat in this class today. We want obviously the best experience and outcome for all who are interacting with us today. We're going to start with part of our culture called Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, which is called the affirmation. I'm going to do that in the Sabaic language and then translate into English so that everybody can understand exactly what's being conveyed. Abdoi kaleh namazurat wu fakur ama kasam un empa paut anuki jawef pa ashuk empa pa paut wu kaleh ashuk kawuf kawun jawef naya anuki kasam un empa paut wu pa paut kawun kasam un emneya anuki wahu ameh pa paut wu pa paut kawun wahu ameh neya nakuk kadur naju ameh kasam un empa paut wu habu ameh mushahus un nakuk kadur kawan kaleh pafef nakuk tayur jawef pa paut ameh waseh ameh tayarni kawun lakei bakoy jawef pa paut anuki abed bi nafashni pa paut kawun anuki pa paut kadur nakuk kadur pa paut amul nakuk amul. Okay, so let's take you back and walk you through the English translation. So we said in the beginning, begin all prayers and thinking as a part of the all, and we were touching a little bit about that in today's class, Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. And we said, I'm in the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am a part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all expanding as long as my want is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is, I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So that was part of our culture called Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, the affirmation. And say for a fully interactive experience, we enable you to obviously ask questions, and it is a question and answer session, but it's within a topic style class as we would refer to it as. And in order to ask questions, we've got a number of settings that you need to just familiarize yourself with. So on the left hand side of your, depending on what device you're using, but on the left hand side you've got this audio settings. So if there's a problem with the sound potentially at your end, you need to change those settings, and that's where you can look at the options, i.e. for your microphone and for your speaker. If you then want to give us some feedback, which is not a question, so it could be, as I say, feeding back like a couple of people have on the quality of the sound or things of that nature, or just giving us feedback generally, positive, negative, whatever the case may be, then please select, you can click the chat button, select panelists and all participants. You need to select that option because default I think is panelists. So it's just so that everybody can see the comment being made, so we don't get duplicate feedback in that regard. Select that and then send your message accordingly. Sometimes I may ask for feedback as it relates to something that we're talking about, and in that case again you can use that to give feedback if I'm asking for a certain question or I'm looking for some feedback on something that we're saying, just to make it a little bit more interactive. There are two ways to ask questions, and so you can do, the first one is to raise your hand, and when you do raise your hand, that basically means that you can come in live and ask your question in an audible way. Once the facilitator or moderator will call your name in the queue, and what they basically then do is they'll click a button and you'll see a message on your screen saying host would like to unmute you. You need to unmute yourself, and then that allows you then to come into myself, Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, as one of the student teachers here, then to be able to assist you with the question that you have to ask. If you've dialed in to the Zoom platform, then you need to *9 to raise your hand, and then it's *6 to unmute your phone, and then *6 again to mute your phone back again. And in a similar vein, when you've finished asking your question, if you just mute back your phone, because at the moment you don't have the ability at the moment to unmute yourself, but when we give you that ability, you can mute yourself and unmute yourself at will. So just not to interrupt the enjoyment of the class for all, if you can make sure that your phone stays muted if you do ask a question, and have that functionality added to your Zoom permissions for this seminar. The other way to ask questions is to click the Q&A icon there, and then you can put in a written question, and what will then happen is at a certain point the facilitators will then ask that question on your behalf. Obviously if I answer the question and you need to follow up, or you understand you're not clear on something in terms of the answer, then by all means continue to give that feedback in that Q&A stream or conversation, and then that will also be read out as well, so you get the complete answer that you may be looking for. Okay, periodically, and you've just experienced that for those on the Zoom platform, and so welcome to those joining us also on Facebook Live. It's a slightly different experience if you're on Facebook Live, so it is a view only. Obviously, if you want the interactive situation where you're asking questions live, so on and so forth, then you need to join us on the Zoom platform. But nonetheless, as I say, if you're on Facebook, welcome. We do have poll questions periodically, and so I'm not sure if we've got any today, but we do have poll questions, and so this will enable us to, as I say, you to pay attention to what's going on in the class, and we do some sort of recap quizzes at times, just to make sure that you're aligned with what we're teaching, understand what's going on, and as I say, just make it a little bit, not that I'm talking all the time, that you've also got some work to do. So you're part of the study process as well. So I am also learning, as you are also learning as a student teacher in Each One Teach One. Obviously, while I have to study to convey this class, I'm learning at the same time as I'm teaching you. So that's what Each One Teach One means. So one of the best ways to learn is to express this information in the correct manner to others, to share it, not to keep it necessarily to oneself. So, okay, let's get into the class. So, again, I'm a student teacher of the master teacher, Dr. Malachi Z, Kobina York Okran. And he was born in Takoradi, West Africa, which is in Ghana, in June 26, 1945. And it's important, as I say, that you have some understanding when you're coming into any class, session, forum, to have an understanding of who is the, I suppose, founder of the organisation, and what it is that they, well, in the West they would say believe in, but something about what is informing where their teachings, so on and so forth, are coming from. So when you're dealing with us as an organisation, some of you may be joining us for the first time, these are the kind of important things that you need to start to look at and assess. But you do that with any organisation, and more importantly, any kind of book that you're picking up. So even to the point of, we pick up dictionaries, so on and so forth, without much thought, just pick it up and look at what the word is and accept or trust exactly how it's been defined, but obviously not thinking that the actual author and their belief system is going to affect the way in which they interpret certain meanings of words and what they convey in that regard. And this is something certainly for our people, Nagar Nadu, or Negroids, in this day and time. It's important that because of what we've been through, that we have to start to look at the influences of certain information that's being conveyed. So a Sabaean or Wu-Sabat or Sabaean is looking at the cause and effect. We're not just interested in cause and effect. And so when we look at the cause and effect, that brings us nicely to the Master Teacher's mother, Mary Abba Dr.York, and the fact that we are a matriarchal society based on natural nature. So in natural nature, which we'll get into a little bit today, within that system that we align ourselves to, it is a matriarchal system as opposed to patriarchal system, as conveyed, I suppose, by the monotheistic religions, maybe falsely. And again, as I say, when you look at the authors of those books, certainly coming out of Greek and Roman influences, but obviously all going back to Sumerian culture. Sumerian culture gave birth to what would be described as Jewishism or Mosesism, or what is referred to is as Judaic culture today, which then gave birth to Christianity, subsequently gave birth to Islam. So in that very specific order. But important to know that those Anunnaki were patriarchal, switched from our matriarchal culture in ancient Africa over to a patriarchal system. And so women's role, as you can see in the monotheistic religions, has been downplayed, as well as obviously Africa's role in the world being downplayed. Africa kind of gets a bad rap in the monotheistic religions when you look at the kind of stories and the way that they've been conveyed. But importantly, I say the woman's role is downplayed. So you can see that in them expressing God, Most High, or whatever they believe is that supreme force, as a he, it diminishes the role and importance of the women's role today. It is something that women, certainly in this day and time, have to question, because it's not, women didn't translate those books, they didn't write them, they didn't translate these books often. It is men that translated them. And as I say, one of the things that you have to understand in natural nature, which was conveyed as saying throughout these classes, and particularly in the last class, is that nature does not nature produces the source or the power source first before it produces that which needs to feed off of that power source. So when you look and you kind of understand they say that woman came out of the rib of a man, but that man as a child or a baby needs to be fed. You understand? This is how nature's system works. And if you believe the story in the way they've been telling that story, I say unproven to date, unproven. No man seemingly has sprung up the ground and been born in his adult form, other than, according to their myth and legend, other than that first man. And as I say, those men need something to feed off of. So it's pre-programmed into the genetics and the genes, programmed into those genes. So that baby, through its spirit or ka'a, to know to go to the mother's breast to be fed. That baby doesn't know anything about any Allah. The baby doesn't know anything about God. Doesn't know anything about Most High. It doesn't know about Jesus. It doesn't know about Abraham. It doesn't know about Isaiah. It doesn't know about Hadith. It doesn't know about all the traditions that all over the world in these monotheistic religions that people are killing each other over today and putting so much of their emotional energy to it. It doesn't know any of those things. But yet it does know to go to its mother's breast to be fed. Understood? So in that system, yeah, the power source or the power is needed before you can have work, before you can have force. Understood? So in our culture, we have to align ourselves back with that which is natural. And this is what we were talking about in the previous session, that our alignment is back with nature. That is part of the solution to get us, well, in part it is the 100% solution of what needs to get us out of the condition that we find ourselves in. And so that's why we have to acknowledge that the many teachers that we've had have been born as opposed to being made. And so this is a natural solution that you're seeing when we talk about Dr. Malachi Z, Dr.York, or Quran. When we talk about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, when we talk about Noble Ali, understood, certain people that have been born to convey a certain message at a certain time for us to rebuild, as I say, that which has been taken away from us. So Mary Abba Akran York, also known as Fatima Miriam, as you see there, born March 10th, is, as we refer to, the master teacher affectionately, is his mother. And as I say, based on the day and time we're in, arguably, as I say, one of the most important sacred feminine born in the last 6,000 years since we found ourselves under this spell. Here you can see, let's say, her in a clan mother attire. So she has now transitioned and is now in the status of one of our Muslafu or ancestors, for you to be able to call upon for assistance, but using your own ancestors. Yes, your own, one of your 30 ancestors, you make 30, and obviously you're 4 generations back. That is what we mean when we talk about Salah for your ancestors. You're 4 generations back. So if you understand how DNA works when a man and woman come together, obviously 1/3 of them, you are 1/3 your mother, you're 1/3 your father, and the combination of the two of them creates a brand new you. But you can inherit any of the characteristics of those people within that your 4 generations. So obviously all the way down to your great-great-grandmother and great-great-grandfather. So some people, as I say, do not look like their mother and father, because you can inherit those characteristics. Now, because of the transference of blood while you're in the placenta in your mother's womb, you inherit the characteristics of those 30 ancestors. So you make up 30. So it's 1 really plus 29. If your parents are alive, then the number goes down, because whilst they're living, their influence is physical. It's not, as you would classify as esoteric, i.e. coming from the blood stream. Understood, in terms of the recording of those desires in your DNA and RNA, as you hear their many voices in your head every waking moment of the day. So it's important for us to start to delve into and understand and peer into what is taking place in the darkness. There's too much emphasis, too much focus on the light. And your ancestors, the Muhammadu, or the ancient Egyptians, understood, to them light was chaos. Yeah, darkness represented, or the blackness represented supreme balancement or order. And the two are not equal. And this is something that we're going to get into in today's class. The two are not equal to each other. many illusionary opposites that get created in this society, and we have to start to now ontologically. So as Sabaeans, we are ontologists, so we're looking to get into the root or the essence of the thing. We are factologists. We deal with factual information. The new spirituality in this day and time cannot be emphasized more, because facts, this transformation that is taking place right now for our people, it starts in a mental transformation first. Understood? And if we're talking in the mathematical system, we might say, for example, if we were talking maths and we understood exactly what we were talking about, you might say 2 + 2 is 4. And that would be 2 + 2 is 4 in the UK. It's going to be the same in America, and the same in Africa. We'll see the same all around the world if we understand what we're talking about in terms of that convention. There's no dispute amongst that. We're not going to argue about what kind of 2 is it, if we understand and agree those conventions. When you start asking questions like what is God or who is God, you get a different answer from everybody on this call, different answer everybody down the road. And then you've got the my God interpretation. You've got those who understand, maybe you speak a little bit of the language and go into it in that regard. You've got somebody who understands it from English. Pure confusion. And so if you cannot have mental alignment, then the physical alignment is going to be off as well. So it starts with the mind first. And one of the reasons why, I suppose, the devastation of the kidnapping, the 400-year kidnapping that they reference in their so-called Bible, in Genesis 15 verse 13, of the 400 years slavery, so 1600 down to the year 2000. One of the reasons why that has been so devastating for our people is because, and in the last 6,000 years, is because we have not been of one culture. We're in everybody else's religion, yet not our own stuff. And when you compare us primarily to the Asians, you compare us to the Dravidians, you compare us to some of these other people, even to some degree to the Mukasu, then that's one of the things. They're unified under a similar, I'm not going to say that exactly the same, but similar type of religions. The Mukasu primarily under Caucasianity or Christianity. You've got the Dravidians under Hinduism. You've got what we call Asians in the UK under Islam today. And as I say, you've got many different cultures around the world of a similar type of spiritual type thinking. Do you understand? And at least at a certain point or level, they seem to align themselves under those religions. We're in everybody else's doctrines and religions, thus that having been taken away from us, and find ourselves living in the image and after the likeness of somebody else's culture. So part of the resolution to that is understanding, as I say, exactly what is taking place in natural nature. Yeah, this is where we're finding part of our solutions, because it's somebody or beings created that state of nature. Yeah, and when we say natural nature, we are acknowledging the, as you want to call it, divine designers or intelligent designers who created that in ancient Egypt, being recorded as Pa Natharu, or the overseers, whose real name is the Murzaku, or the providers as it translates as. So his father, Al-Hadi Abdul Rahman Al-Mahdi, part of the royal family out of Sudan, born 1922. Unfortunately was assassinated in 1970, but again provides a great bloodline in that regard, linked to Mustafa Muhammad Al-Mahdi of the Sudan. We've gone in that in more detail in previous classes because we've got to move on and get into some subjects today. If you want to know more about these, obviously seek out this book here, Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, The Guidance, or as I say, go to some previous sections where we've gone into this in more detail. And this is Master Teacher at age 25, when, as he states, was housed by a being named El Khadir, the Green One. So when we talk about in our culture, one of the ways in which our story is renewed, and I have to make this point all the time because it can make us sound a bit crazy to the outside world, because of the way in which the Western media has run up front and made certain things that are factual in our culture associated with science fiction, myth, legend, and so on and so forth through the medium of the television, the cinema, and other types or whatever, running up front, knowing exactly how the way in which our culture works. But you don't see indigenous people, prime, first world, indigenous peoples, generally speaking, digging up the bones of their ancestors to stay connected with their culture. Nor do you see animals doing that and certain things like that. So there is a methodology within the natural system that allows the transference of information. And in our culture, every 25,000 years, rounded up, our story has to be renewed, understood. And that progressively means teachers being born into this environment or world, studying amongst, learning amongst their people. So to each race, let me just make that clear as well, to each race, remember, is sent a warner. So the Chinese have their warner, understood, and one of the examples of that is Confucius. The Dravidians have their warner. One of the examples of that is Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi is not my warner. Being of Nagaru descent doesn't mean that you can't learn knowledge or wisdom from those individuals. But as we've made this point before, he was a racist, against blacks. So at a certain point, he's for his own people. He's not for me. So what he teaches at certain points is going to be in that context. Understood. Now there may be correlations, there may be similarities and things that, let's say, one can align himself with, being open-minded, but you also have to be controlled-minded in understanding who he was and who he was sent to. Understood. And that's the way nature's system works. And so we've gone through that a little bit in part one in terms of understanding how it's structured, how the Natharu structured the system based on what we refer to as physical ethers, how the various different extraterrestrials responsible for the creations of this various species on this planet, and therefore then those main or original species have then intermingled with each other and created then certain subspecies. They each are registering on a different scale or vibrational rate, and that's why we look different, we have different DNA. Actually, we optimize in different environments, different food types, so on and so forth. This is the same thing you see in the animal kingdom. When it comes into human beings, a certain group of people, i.e. the Mukasu or the Caucasians, want us to ignore all of that because they want to hide the fact of their inferiorities when it comes to looking at genes, when it comes to looking at disease and so on and so forth. So they want to hide that from the world and then leave us all in this state of ignorance, given that at the moment they seem to be the ones in control of most of the media and information sources around the world. And it leaves us in ignorance, not respecting the differences and arguably some of the boundaries between us that have been created, as I say, as a part of those extraterrestrials creating beings in their image and after their likeness, but in accordance with the natural system or not in accordance with the natural system. And I say, to make it clear and plain, it's the same way like when you're looking around your room right now, you're on the internet, somebody has had to think forward and say, okay, well, for the internet and your router and various things of that nature to work, it needs to be within a certain frequency range. That frequency range can't interrupt, can't be the same frequency range as a television. Otherwise, the two are going to cause interference. It can't be the same frequency range as your radio. It can't be the same frequency range as certain other electrical devices, your mobile phone, so on and so forth, which are in the house. Otherwise, it creates interference. And so the races are structured in a similar way insofar as we are vibrating on different ranges or ether ranges within nature's system. understood, and the two don't necessarily are supposed to cross over into each other. And so those who obviously designed their descendants in that system, we refer to them as natural. Those who decided, well, we're not going to work with that system, we're going to steal and work against that system, that is considered to be unnatural. And so you don't just judge it by the look, you also judge it by the collective behaviors of the individuals and how they move, understood? So in this regard. But point to say is that in order to restore us back to our supreme state, as one might have it, according to what we're supposed to be in nature, is necessary for our older ancestors to come back, as I say, teach us. And this is done in the form in the Egyptian culture, which is referred to as Amun, Nabab, Rayay, Akhtar, understood? And this is a vehicle or a vessel that allows the in-housing of, some may describe as whole-like beings or our ancestors, of various points and times to in-house, to convey the story or convey certain information that we need in this day and time from beings who were actually there when incidents took place. So past, present and future all roll into one when you're talking about us in our understanding, into an overstanding of time. Because within existence you have time, space, time and matter. These are the three principles needed within existence, and all of that is part of now. Yes, and so this Amun Nubit Nabab Rayakta, right on time, the ice cream van you can hear in the background. They kick in, as I say, and allow that mechanism, as I say, to be accessed in nature for us to get the right information, the factual information about how we as a species came around, who we are in terms of past, what we are now in terms of present or what we've become, how that needs to be tackled and addressed in order for us to take control and rule our destiny and our future going forward. And so that Amun Nabab Rayay Akhtar is the proper name. In ancient Muhammadu or Egypt, that being was referred to as Tehuti, or Tehuti, or you say Tehuti, Tehutwi. Yeah, and so in housing in the first 30 years, from 1970 down to around the year 2000, when the Holy Tablets was put out, around 1996, we talked about him being housed by El Khadir, the Green One. And now in this day and time, as we moved into the hereafter, on into the thereafter doctrine, actual fact, master's secrets, talking about the who we are, the real us now, getting into our culture, leaving the monotheistic religions, having mastered those, but leaving those now certainly in our rear view mirror, understood, but not in the form of straight line direction, but rather what is being described as we move from to what we would describe as cyclical evolution. So what we learned before, we're now basically relearning that, but we walked all the way back to ancient Egypt, so we're able to look at it from a higher state, but having walked that walk and that kind of path, it allows us to communicate with those still on those levels. So the being today in housing is known as Yananan or Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn. And as I say, whether it sounds crazy, whether it sounds realistic to you or whatever the case may be, you judge a tree by the fruit it bears. So you look at the outformation coming to us in the form of information and then see, as I say, what it is being produced and reading it and taking and participating, etc. That is the only way that you're going to find out and know. And one of the things is that our people not only deserve, but it's only just that basically we have information sources, we have a spirituality, we have all of the things necessary for us to fulfill our potential in nature that comes from us. Why do we have to go to a white preacher to get our people married? Why do we have to go to a white funeral home for them to bury us? Why do we, does our interpretation of every religion or our spirituality have to be through the lens of a Caucasian person? And if you go and do something else other than that, they say, oh, you're a cult. This is how they've got it set up. If you speak against the injustice, or in the case that unjust behavior in their system, their just us system, if you speak against the equality, or you highlight the inequality between the races, they want to call you a black supremacist group and other different names they got waiting for you. Understood? And our people, obviously being under a certain spell, don't always check things out the way they should do and know who's talking. Yeah, because one of the things that you certainly know in the last 6,000 years, everything we've been taught in this Mukasu society today has been a lie. Everything you've been taught has been a lie. And when you accept that reality, then you can start rebuilding or brainwashing your mind because of the dirt that has been, misinformation that has been filled with, understood, over this time that many of us have been alive. Many of us have been born into racism. We've been born into it, or wrong racism, understood, and did our best and still do our best with the cards that we have been dealt with in this fake life, which has caused, as I say, where they have put themselves between us and nature. Yeah, most children today probably think chickens come from a supermarket. You understand? Well, that's how most of our experience is chicken from a supermarket. Understood? Yeah, and we have to be very detailed about how things arise in relation to what we're looking at today to get ourselves out of the conditions that we find ourselves in. So you see some great names there on the side, and they're all part of, as I say, one would argue to be a master plan to get our people out of the conditions, as I say, that they found themselves in, reintroducing in terms of a second resurrection. When we talk about a second resurrection, that is talking about a mental resurrection, a mental transformation, which would then inform the physical transformation. So a mental change in our behavior, understood? Because in the interceptions in the last 400 years in the genome, which led to unnatural behaviors against nature's law, and we talked about this in the last cast in dealing with the code of the races. So we were attacked for being black. We are attacked in the wrong racism. We're attacked for being black. We are attacked because we are black, which is against the code of the races, insofar as enacting harm or doing something to somebody of another race because of their race. Yeah, and therefore, in nature's rules, it carries a more significant punishment as a result. So various different teachings about to come along. You see the great sort of Honorable Elijah Muhammad there, starting out taking sort of pimps, prostitutes, so on and so forth, and transforming them into a highly functional, self-sufficient organization in the throughout the 30s on into the 70s before he was assassinated, and the greatness that he achieved from very humble beginnings. Yeah, and that then brought in or enabled, as I say, the works then to continue by way of the reformer, Dr. Malachi Z, or Quran, to continue those works in aiding our transformation, as long as many others on this list. But we make the point to say that many of them, Noble Ali imprisoned, also killed. Honorable Elijah Hamid was imprisoned on May 8th, which also happens to be 60 years later, the same day that the Master Teacher himself was also imprisoned on May 8th as well. So you see certain various correlations, interesting correlations that we see in the wrong kind of way on those that were sent in order to, as I say, correct the situation that we find ourselves in today. Now, I'm going to jump straight into where we need to talk about today in part 2. So anything that we need to go back to, you need to check out part 1. Any questions before I move on?
Yes, we have a question here from Den Amireye. It says, Rahubat Nababkak Nihes. How do you call on the oldest ancestor first to avoid disembodied spirits listening and pretending to be the present ancestor you're calling on? Tawatak.
Some people may not know what that's talking about. I suppose it's the rituals that one needs to understand to make connection with the ancestors that are inside their own bloodstream. So we talk about those 4 generations, and the main kind of separation that you need to understand in, I suppose, how the rules work in terms of them responding, is that when it's something to do with your own personal life, as I say, help me with my phone bill, I'm struggling, my finances, etc. Well, you call upon your personal ancestors for that, so your blood relatives in that regard. And our rituals, because of, remember, you are both an etheric being as well as a physical one. Yeah, so you are both. Your ancestors, or your Salafu, as they refer to it as, are not. They are energy, etheric. They're not physical. So because you are both, you need to make the link between them to enable communication to take through, to enable communication to come through and to be understood. Obviously, they may try to do so in terms of guiding or helping to assist us in the physical, but if we're vibrating on such a low rate, we may not see those signs or messages, so on and so forth, that tell us to avoid certain situations, or maybe to go with certain situations that are going to be of benefit to ourselves. But also remember, you are at the head of your bloodline, understood? And so therefore, in one sense, yes, it's an individual aspect to you, but then obviously you've got an opportunity, if we can align back with Wu-Sabat and master the various skills and abilities that we have inherently within us, then you can become a savior for your whole bloodline, and certainly for ancestors trapped within those lower realms. So the simple answer to the question is there's no difference to calling on the oldest one. So what the questioner is alluding to is the fact that when a person starts to engage, so one of the things is that you got to do some research on finding out, well, who are my ancestors? So in those 4 generations, and you look at it, you at the top of the period, you imagine a picture. Then you got your mother and father. Then you got your grandmother and grandfather on both sides. So it looks like, when we draw it out, it looks like a pyramid, doesn't it? Yes. And so you've got to be able to draw that out and start to fill in the various different gaps. Now, if you think in the physical lineage of an individual is recorded, understood, only along the female bloodline. The mitochondrial DNA is what is basically the lineage, is where the lineage information is stored. It's not stored through the male. Understood? I've gone into that many times, so please check out the previous parts in relation to that. So you have to have a daughter to carry on your bloodline. So in the system, remember, the etheric, the physical system is mimicking that which has taken place in the etheric system. Yeah, some may refer to it as like a blueprint. Yeah, so you've got a blueprint, and then when you design and materialize that blueprint, then obviously you have the 2 things, as I say, which are in correlation to each other. So therefore, your oldest feminine ancestor is who you want to establish the relationship first, if you know it, and then she provides a protection, as I say, against all others, as I say, within the bloodline. So you kind of learn to build those relationships. There's no sacrificing of any chickens or so on and so forth. These are lower entity forces. If you think about it, they say the best things in life are free, and then when we look at those best things in life, air, water, sun rays, so on and so forth, that sustain us within the environment. These things we don't have to pay for, and nobody has to sacrifice in relation to that. And one of the things why you understand that is because nature works in abundance. It produces more of a thing in order to get a certain type of result. So if you think about it, when we arrived here, as all of us on this call, on this seminar, yeah, it was a response to an explosion of 777,777,777 sperm ejaculated, overstood in an explosion, and then one of those was needed, as I say, to fertilize the egg, to form that big bang on a microscopic level in order to produce our life. So therefore, nature works in abundance. It floods a certain situation to ensure a certain result. And there's a lot of space in space, when you understand space. So, and how big universes are. So this is, as I say, why you need to make that connection first and then utilize them in different ways. You establish the relationship now whilst you are living, and then that will obviously assist you in when you transition, or the physical body expires and you transition, they will obviously be there to assist, waiting for you, to help you, as I say, in the next evolutionary growth cycle, to exist as a spiritual being, or live as a spiritual being in whatever you choose then to do next. Some people choose to come back, you understand, to balance out certain things. Some people have to come back to balance out certain things, and some people choose to ascend, so they're waiting there for you to assist you in that regard, and that's their role. So yeah, there's no difference to calling upon the oldest one to one who is not the oldest. It's the same ritual. It's just that you have to find out who the oldest is, and you establish the relationship for that purpose. And as I say, you direct things to help you in your life, to those ancestors. And if you're making connections with beings who have existed, millions of years, thousands of years before, who you don't have the factual information to confirm that person existed, then you utilize your solar food to make that connection to them. Because, say, if someone's trying to call upon Asar, or they say Osiris, and these kind of characters who lived millions of years ago, well, you don't know that person exists. So what's the difference between calling upon that name or calling upon Jesus, or Muhammad or Isaiah or whatever? There's no difference in that regard. But those who are in your bloodline, the fact that you're there means that you must have a mother and father, and they must have a mother and father. That is factual. That's not spookism. Understood? So that's what it's talking about, for that purpose, to establish at least a certain level of protection in that regard. And there are other things connected with that. You have to make sure your environment's right, so on and so forth. But there's a ritual that's done, white sage, using a candle, white tablecloth, pictures of the ancestor that you're trying to get in contact with, and then when that picture is up and you're seeking to make that communication, all others should be face down. You establish those relationships. And so this is some of the practical elements of Wu-Sabat that we need to start to master again, these spiritual faculties and powers, because we're not going to overcome this situation that we find ourselves without self-mastery. Understood? So when you're thinking about, some people might just think about and say, well, why didn't our ancestors jump in and stop this and stop that, so on and so forth? Well, you start to learn in nature that certain things, well, if something's already inherently gifted to you, but you haven't developed it, understood? Well, I've already helped you, haven't I? I've already given you the assistance that you need to help yourself. If you're not using it because of ignorance, then we need to put somebody in place to teach you. But we're not going to unbalance nature's system by artificially putting in systems and help that go against those rules. So the rules, as we have them, they can't be changed. Understood? And one of the things that you see in the natural sort of justice system is that the rules are triggered by certain behaviors, and they're dispassionate insofar as they're not looking or judging, oh, well, this person's a nice person, what we think what is nice, and this person's not so nice. The rules are the rules. Understood? So it eliminates the kind of bias, understood, that we see in the so-called just us system of the Caucasian. Yeah, that we see. Yeah, so as I say, we've gone through this a few times in terms of nature being a reactive state. And so you have to understand what those rules are. And there are ways, there's not ways to get around them, but a master, an incarnated master, knows to apply the rules of a higher plane to a lower plane in order to navigate and achieve certain things. And this is one of the things that we need to start to understand. You understand? I'm worrying about who Abraham's daughter was, or who he was married to, or their bloodlines, etc. Things that took place thousands of years ago that have nothing to do with our culture, and getting in arguments with different religions, none of which, as I say, has got anything to do with what we were doing back in ancient Africa. Any other questions?
Yes, there's another question from Heriberto. My apologies if I've pronounced your name incorrectly. The question goes, in 2023, a vortex is going to open. Will that help us connect directly to our ancestors, and will that help us transform to another planet? And how will it affect our body?
Okay, there's a lot of questions in there. It's going to take me a little bit off of where we need to be today. So what you have in various different ways is a number of different phenomena taking place at the same time. So you have what is referred to that happens every 24,000 years, which I think you're alluding to, referring to as a dimensional shift. The vortex, what you're referring to, opens every 10 years on the planet, understood? And so the planet has its own biorhythm. The planet itself vibrates around about 8 hertz, and I think the Mukasu refers to this as something called Schumann's resonance. And so it reaches a higher state of vibration, I suppose, every 10 years in terms of its. And this provides an opportunity, as I say, for the various different vortexes around the world for beings to come through interdimensionally, if that's what you're referring to. Now, remember that I am America map by a Native American child, as she was at the time. Now, obviously, a big woman now named Lori Adetoyi, I think, Adetoyi, if memory serves me correctly. She channeled that map through and showed these various different vortexes around the world today. So it's just one of a number of different routes that we have in our favor, let's say. Now, when you talk about how it's going to affect the human body, the ability for us to transform is coupled it's not just with the vortex open. Remember, the planet is going through various different changes. So every 10 years that happens, you've got something called a dimensional shift, which happens every 24,000 years, where the planet itself, as a living entity, seeks to raise its vibrational level, and in doing so, anything that doesn't match or marry to that vibrational level gets left behind on the lower planes. So the planet is vibrating now between the range of it's a 6 ether planet, and is seeking to evolve or grow, let's say, to be vibrating at the 7, 8 and 9 ether ranges. So anything vibrating on below a 6 ether level will get left behind once that shift takes place. So in order for human beings to be aligned with that transformation or shift, then, like anything else in life, we have to be putting in the work and the spiritual exercises in order to control our rate of vibration to make ourselves aligned with natural nature. Now, some of the aspects of that are chanting, prayer, meditation in the proper tones, and we'll touch a little bit on that today as well, in the proper tonations, A major, C major, and F major. Wu-Sabat as a frequency, or you being aligned with what your ancestors given you, provides you with a pathway called Partarak, which is helping you to be aligned. So it's not just a thing of, oh, let me just sink in and receive messages in my head and let me feel like I'm aligned with natural nature. There's a teacher been sent, or teachers been sent along the line of them, telling you exactly, this is my job. But the problem is with the spell is that when the person's freckles are too close, we don't respect dark-skinned leadership on this planet. So therefore, everybody wants to buck against it. We believe everything that the ghost leaders say, but then when it comes to our leaders, we want to question everything. But yeah, we didn't put the same level of questioning in those who didn't have our best interests at heart. So the person is telling you, this is my job. I'm the Aman Nabab Raya Khakhtar. And so therefore, and then I'm giving you certain things. I'm giving you Partarak, which means the way. Understood? I'm giving you these things. This is plain and simple. I'm giving it to you. Obviously, but there's all this distortion, everything else out there that doesn't make it easy to make that choice to say, oh, this is the right way for us. So in the year 2000 was the end of the devil's rule. 6,000 year dominion given to the Adamites. Then, so that created the hereafter. The information that was then being conveyed was the hereafter doctrine. And then when the symbolic situation of 2012, which was a move in natural nature to restore the woman back to power again, understood, associated with the 2012, which is 2012 is a code in actuality, but it's symbolic of an event that takes place where the planet's axis, as I say, starts to point towards or point away from the center of the galaxy where there's a massive black hole. And that takes 6,000 years or so to reach its apex. So we're moving from pointing away now to pointing towards the center of the galaxy, so where there's this black hole. And so that is a transformation of us going back to a matriarchal aligned frequency. And so we're matching that, as you see, with certain books that were released specifically for the sacred feminine, the Gospel of Yaanuwn to the sacred feminine, certain books that were released to teach women about some of their inner faculties, understood, because the woman must transform first. If she is aligned with natural nature, as nature transforms, it will transform her. She will then transform her man. Understood, because she still has the solar biological or lunar biological connection to the universe. Her menstrual cycle is aligned with the 4 phases of the moon, so she still has that connection. Men don't have that connection in that way. So that's the way nature's system works, in aligned with the planetary changes, the dimensional shift. Also, say the planet's axis, the precessional change, 2012 is referred to as, is pointing towards the center of the galaxy. A number of things are aligning at the same time, which is one of the reasons why they wanted the master out, or taken away from his people in 2002, because, as you rightly referenced, on the 3rd or 3 of every decade, this vortex opens. So they know that, as I say, we talked about this on the previous class, about these golden children who have a certain type of configuration to intercept our genome and help us to raise that vibrational rate that you were making reference to, and aid that transformation by being able to be taught or touched by the master, in sync with the master, who is able to discern between what we're calling the physical plane, plane of force, spiritual plane, mental plane, because the characteristics of these different planes is making reference to the vibrational rate of the composite atoms that are within those planes, referred to as nutation. Understood? So the nutation rate of things, for example, on the physical plane is the same irrespective of size. So an incarnated master such as the Amun Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn, this Malachi Dr.York, is able then to discern between that, and so therefore is able then to teach these golden children how then to correlate, because we all, or Nagarus, have the 9 planes within us, but let's say you don't know what you don't know. So somebody has to be able to teach you to sink in to know, that's the difference between that's the difference between this plane, and then how do I transmute between those planes, in order to align, as I say, our ancestors who have been trapped on lower planes at the point of death, and then are feeding six ether forces to realign that then with our race today, so that our race full racial energy is being directed to our ancestors only, and doesn't provide itself to be a battery for other races' etheric ancestors or forces. Understood? So in a kind of short way, that is the answer to your question. 2030 is really the kind of optimum date, because the first 30 years was really tackling the religious spell and the school that we were under, because originally, remember, in the 1963, the master teacher wrote, with the aid of what they say Wunupu, Asanupu and Nabanupu, the 3 Romanians or Greys that assisted him, because remember, when you talk about whole light beings in housing the human body is not structured in the right way, because of the upgrades still to take place in the phylogeny. You understand? Our genetic structure is still transforming, it's still growing, and so certain change needs to be made. So they had to what we would say naturally influence or change his body over time to be able to in-house these whole light beings, so that certain information could be conveyed to us at a set point in time. So when you read the 9 ball parts 1 to 4, we need Bible explanations and misinterpretations. It is a roadmap for how our race is to get itself out of this situation. It's an amazing set of books, principles, etc. Absolutely revolutionary for its time. But we wanted to worship Abraham and Muhammad and Jesus and so on and so forth. We didn't want to let go of what the white man gave us, which is understandable, as you think about a domestic violence victim in that type of situation. The love of the perpetrator is warped, isn't it, in a sense, wanting to please, wanting to acquiesce their life around the person, and somebody else looking at it from the outside may say, well, why don't you just break away, why don't you just leave the person? Obviously, because they've been mentally damaged by the physical torture, and in a similar way, our race is exactly the same way, isn't it? White person walks in the room, why is your voice going up 3 octaves? You understand? Before you were speaking to with full bass. Then all of a sudden, this white person walks in the room, you're going up 2-3 octaves. Why? Why are you adjusting on? There's a group of blacks, we produce something that's for self. As soon as it gets successful, it could be a TV show or something else. We need this white cast member. You understand? Because it's too black. As soon as it gets popular, we need to, figure it out of how we can include them somehow. Where there's, thousands of programs and things where we were never included, and we were expected to compromise and watch those things. So, there is a necessity, as I say, of focusing on, well, people may call it healing, whatever the case may be, but it's actually just applying the solution that was being presented to us in its holistic fashion. Do you understand? In its 360-degree physical, in its 360-degree esoteric, a 720-degree application of the solution. So you can't just be, a person who just reads books. You can't just be a person who just engages in spirituality. You can't just be a person who doesn't tackle the health side. You can't just be a person who doesn't is not selfless in being able to serve others and help others. You understand? That's even the next level of things again. You can't be a person who's an individualist. You have to be able to work with other people of your kin or kind or whatever to effectuate certain solutions. Yeah, so all these things is a holistic solution. I think one of the things that we fail sometimes to appreciate is the amount of effort and work that has gone into certain things. When we're delivering these sessions to your classes, we're even in the last session, in the first session, it's not something that we may be able to convey, but we're talking about things that were delivered in the 60s, and we're linking it up to things which directly correlate to certain information that's been released last year or earlier this year, and they all sync together in this kind of puzzle or whatever. It was released that way to keep it away from the Luciferians, so they didn't or wasn't able to stop, let's say, you receiving Wu-Sabat in this day and time to enable, as I say, the second resurrection. So the way it correlates, and you start going into things, thinking, oh man, this thing, damn. You understand the way it pieces itself together. Only somebody who's really going in and seeing that, and then you understand, oh, but this is the same situation we were talking about this before that our ancestors are in. Energy has been displaced in various different ways at lower ether levels. We spoke about it in previous classes, and it needs to be pieced back together, because those who are not worthy of it are using it as batteries to empower forces that cause death, decay, and destruction. Yeah, and we represent the forces that are creation and growth. So it's a whole system of things that's going on. It's not just one thing that's going on at the same time, but it's culminating, because this is the end of, when they say end of times, it's not really end of time, it's talking about the end of an era. Yeah, and so that's the end of the devil's rule, as you want to call it, the devil or whoever, but the 6,000 year rule of the Mokasu. And that, when you say devil, is talking about adversary, opposite forces in nature. So it's not about this, the religious titles in terms, it's talking about just adverse forces in nature. Yeah, and say the Mokasu broke that code of the races, and so therefore judgment must be, or justice must be fulfilled in relation to them, because, as I say, continually over that time they've sought to attack, manipulate, let's say, other races, and in nature, not according to what we're doing, but in nature's system, let's say, there's no more delayed justice for them. It must be paid back to their scapegoat dogma that we talked about in part 1. That's over for them now. No more extension of time. And as you see, nature now starting to attack them directly. Any other questions?
Linda, you had your hand raised for quite some time. Did you still want to ask a question? You've lowered it now. I don't know whether you still want to ask a question. There is another question outstanding here from Heriberto, and he said, what is the 8th chamber?
Good question. Good question. We walked through various different schools. What I'll say to that is that in order to walk through that door, sometimes we require some stability, understood, in the form of a 2-ball cane. Any other questions?
No further questions.
No further questions.
Okay, so we were touching upon, I think, in the last slide, I think this was the last slide that we got to at the end of part 1, when we're dealing with certain aspects of what is considered to be natural or true justice. Yes, true justice, and then some of the rules as it applies itself in in nature. And so there needs to be certainly an understanding amongst all races of where they came from. But we know through wrong racism that this is not emphasized, it's not taught to all in respect of the kind of human experience, understood? And so you see many things in the Western culture today, as I say, which is in the control of the Mokasu or the Caucasian, based upon our ancestors, but then the respect is never given, the acknowledgement is never given, and even in their Bible they say honor their mother and father, isn't it? So their days will be long and prosperous. And so the reason why their days are not being long and prosperous and they're ending in a 6,000 year end, which is programmed by their overlords, the Pleiadians, into their actual genome, so reflected in the telomeres for the individual, but the telomerase for the actual race itself. So they were designed to expire, understood. And we see here, just in terms of these natural clocks that are kicking in, that, as I say, the menorah symbol that they're using is actually linked to Lucy, who was found, let's say, in Ethiopia. As you see there, Australopithecus, to show you that basically all of their stuff is based upon somebody else's culture that lived prior or before them, in prehistory, maybe you may call it, or even in our story now. You understand? They are the race of imitators as opposed to actually creating. So they are the imitators. The Hindu is the thinker, or Dravidians are the thinkers, they say, and then we have the ability to reason. You understand? So reasoning, I'm going to touch upon that a little bit later as well. So we were touching upon, as I say, the fact, I think in the last class we were ending with the fact, for those just joining us for the first time, with I suppose how the various different how those different races came around, and we were looking at or explaining, I should say, physical ethers. So physical ethers is a phenomena where basically is expressing the fact that each of the different races, as I say, has a number of species within the race, and those are classified in nature's system as physical ethers. We touched upon this a little bit earlier. So this is different to ether, which is energy. So when we talk about the separation between matter, so your 99 elements as they have it in this system, 99 elements, so from hydrogen down to Einsteinium, this would be considered to be, in their system, matter. And then beyond that, or before that, we start dealing with subatomic particles. We now move into the world of energy. So if you want to quickly kind of have a simplistic understanding, world of energy, world of matter. We're going to go into that in a lot more detail in the next class. I'm going to be dealing with natural ether energy. So yeah, if you're interested in that side of things, we're going into that in the classes in October. Now, so when we're dealing with, so we was explaining about the different physical ethers, and when dealing with the Mukasu, remember we was explaining that they came from 6 genetic pools, but the men vibrate on 5 ether and the females vibrate on 6 ether, which basically gives you 11, which ties into the 11 sons of Canaan that you read about in Genesis chapter 10, but ties into the curse of parasi, or leprosy, that was imparted upon him in Genesis 9:25, which fell upon, remember, the servant of servants. So this was who they call Canaan in their biblical story. Understood? So we have, as I say, 9 physical ethers, or 9 subspecies, excuse me, not subspecies, species within our race that we touched upon last time. You have the basically the Aborigines, who have 8 different species within their race. The Dravidians, or you call Indians, they have 7 in their race. We deal with the Mongoloid or Mongalu, who in America they call Asians, but we in England refer to as Orientals. They have 3 different species also within their race. Understood? So you have these different characteristics, and the Sands people, so if you have the characteristics of all of the original root races, they just don't have the characteristics of the bleared eye, or colourless iris, of the Mukasu. Understood? So these are markers placed. So you have species within the various different races, which is a signature of the overlords who created them, or the extraterrestrials, let's use a modern day term. There's extraterrestrials who created them, and then within that you have markers, genetic markers, that identifies them uniquely. So there's characteristics, almost like I suppose maybe it sounds a bit harsh to say, but like a farmer might stamp their cattle or whatever the case would be with a mark to say, hey, these are part of mine. If two cows come together, this is what distinguishes mine. If you got land which is being shared or doesn't have fencing necessarily around it, so and this is what's done in terms of the human species. So it's a warning, I suppose, in some sense as well, to other groups of extraterrestrials not to mess with an ongoing plan, to say, that may be taking place. And remember, this is, when we talk about ourselves, for example, this is a project that's been going on for, millions of years, and even going further back than that. So we were talking about that in the last class in terms of physical ethers, and that's what brings us up into what we're referencing today. So here we talk about in some detail how, as I say, the kind of bones and certain things that they're finding that show or evidence pre-history, long before the kind of 6,000 year birth of the Caucasian and their Bible, his story. It talks about us as a group of 9 etheric beings having 9 physical ethers. Yeah, so sort of yellow or caramel coloured. You see that you see in South Africa, but then you go to the Congo, for example, you see almost blue, black, and all of those are different, and various different hues between are, as I say, representations of physical ethers within our race. And so that comes from 9 etheric beings. It's shown here in verse 10. This is out of, I think, the book called Lotus of Life. So 9 etheric beings, as I say, who have positioned themselves and been guiding the progression of our race through various different projects, ultimately the seeding of life here on this planet. Obviously, one of the characteristics of us that makes us extraterrestrial in nature is because when you look at all other beings on the planet, animals and other even races of human beings, they have fur on the top of their head. We are the only ones who have fur, as well as you maybe see the sheep as well. So this is an extraterrestrial trait from this planet, which I say is vibrating currently as a 6 ether planet. Yes, so it's touching upon the fact, and we've gone through this.
I think what you meant. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think you meant to say we're the only ones who have hair. You said fur.
Oh, we only ones have fur. Did I say that? Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I'd stop you there. And
yeah, thanks for the correction. Yeah, thanks for the correction. Appreciate that. Yeah, the only ones who have hair on the planet, real hair, or what's considered to be hair. Everybody else has fur. So, as I say, brothers on the phone with moustaches and beards, that is fur, obviously, as opposed to hair on their legs, arms, chest, even for some people, back. That is not hair, that is fur. Understood? And so we see, as I say, standards of beauty, trying to make, as I say, that which is genetically inferior associated with that which is beautiful, and that which is genetically superior associated with that which is ugly. So we as Nagarus use the word relax our hair to transform it into fur. Understood? And we consider that to be more beautiful than leaving our hair in its natural state. You understand? So this is some of the things, both men and women, you understand? But this is the things, or we put fur on our head insofar as a wig or a weave now. And we consider that to be more beautiful than our natural hair. Understood? So, and we hear all of the excuses, etc. But this is part of what was created, is it, in the 400 years, and so that's what men like, and then women acquiesce to look at to do what men like. So we could sit here pointing the finger at each other of who's to blame, or we could stand together arm in arm and point our fingers directly on who's responsible for it, which is the Mukasu. You understand? And that's not devolving blame, that's targeting who has been attacking us for the last 6,000 years and put our focus there and think about, we look into each other's eyes and think about, hey, how are we going to get out of this? And think about what we both need to do to transform ourselves, and then work together in order to achieve that, because women have certain strengths that men don't have, and men have certain strengths that women don't have. So therefore, us coming together as a race is obviously going to be a better solution than all these different blogs and various different things pointing out the flaws between each other. And women were not transformed back to a matriarchal society to just use that power to point out the flaws of men. Obviously, it's transforming to transform the planet. You understand? So this is why we need you back in that leadership state, because you have the access or the connection directly with nature in that regard, in the physical sense. Now, so 90 fruit beings pattern then the responsibility of then creating us as a race. That's why we have 9 different species in relation to our race. So the ancient Egyptians referred to these individuals that you see on the right as the Natharu, Natharu, which means overseers in the English language, but their name is Zaku, or Riskians, as translated into English, meaning providers. Yes, and so did a whole breakdown on that in a previous class, going to certain events that took place 9 billion years ago. So I'm not going to cover those. So check out our YouTube channel, or the actual fact tones, vibrational energy. Now, so Yaanuwn is one of those, as part of a group coming to transform us. So I'm not going to go into this in loads of detail. But here you see a table of various different, as I say, interceptions in the human genome from the original seed that was placed here by your ancestors, referred to as the Riskians, which led to the formulation or growth of the Sands people in South Africa. Excuse me. And so originally, remember, what happened is that that seed was placed here in the waters of this planet, and I say around in what we would consider to be, or what is called today, the Indian Ocean, because they had set up a base in what is known as Antarctica today. Understood? And the dolphin which was used, the dolphin has 44 chromosomes, and as I say, when you probably do some research or study, you find out that they have a strong correlation to human beings as mammals, and the size of their brain as well is in fact similar size to a human being's brain. The word dolphin itself means womb, and the reason why it gets the word womb is because we were placed inside of the dolphin. Excuse me, we were placed inside a dolphin, and the dolphin was transported here from an egg-shaped craft, extraterrestrial craft, and then placed in the waters here, as you see it's expressing here, from the Orion star constellation, from beings originally but from Sirius C as the Mentharu. And we know that Sirius itself is the gateway between the 18th and the 19th galaxies. Understood? Yes? And so those genes, obviously, with the dolphin then defecating in the waters of this planet, led to, as I say, development of single cell protozoas, then on into amoebas, so on and so forth. And you've got many different stages before you get to where we are, but let's say we came out of the waters came out of the waters, as I say, and then found ourselves in South Africa, you understand? When we came out of the waters, thrown onto land by various different tsunamis that took place that put us on the land in South Africa. So these individuals have been monitoring our development and progression, are responsible for our progression and development as their children. And that's why we have a growth, I'm not using the word evolutionary pathway for a reason, but we have a growth pathway or an ascension pathway as a result of that, because that's who our etheric parents are, who have long, as I say, had mastered or overcome the concept of the physical body and no longer then needed it to survive, understood, being able to sustain themselves off of energy or ethers, so then had no longer need of this physical structure. We'll get into that sorry for now. So the Sands people, as you see, we find ourselves various different interceptions into that original genome by various different extraterrestrials, leading to, let's say, different races being formed on the planet, willfully and some all willfully, and then them having their own different ascension pathway as a result of that to us, hence their own teachers being sent to them, so their own books to optimize their liberty within the planet's environment, and then being placed on certain places around the environment before the and subsequently after the land masses split, which were originally, remember, all one, yeah, which they refer to as Pangaea in the Greek culture. Understood? So on the side you see here is that evolution, so we can see, you know, whether it's called Egg Island because it was an egg-shaped craft, understood, that dropped those genes in the waters here by way of the dolphin, but say we set up this base in Antarctica, and say those were dropped into the waters, and then we migrated as the Sands people on this singular landmass or continent, as I say, to various different places, you understand, as those original hominids, as we came out of those the waters, you know, Sands people, 5'4" for males, 4'5" in height for females. So that was the original height of us as human beings. Obviously, us now a lot taller than that today. We are their evolutionary descendants, as has been described as. Obviously, so certain mixtures have come in that then produce a different type of configuration, and even we have a slightly different DNA structure to those original, as I say, hominids. So they were based on a ferrous nucleic acid type structure, whereas now today is that we have RNA, ribonucleic acid, and then DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid structure as a result. But all of those is from those a migration that took place. So I know there's this kind of out of Africa theory that they use to describe how the different races changed and so on and so forth. It's all rubbish. The migration that took place is us ourselves as Sands people making our way across Pangaea and ending up, as I say, in different parts of the planet. And then you had continental drift, which meant then we were, let's say, in different parts of the planet, and different extraterrestrials have intercepted the original gene configuration that enabled life to be produced here on Earth. And that's how you get different blood types, different configurations, because they're basing the design on their own genetics or genes, and nothing to do with cold weather. You understand? If it's the case, we'll explain penguins to us, explain killer whales, understood, explain non-recessive genes in cold environments. You understand? Snow leopards and different creatures of that nature who have melanin, or an abundance of melanin. So, you know, as I say, everything that you've been taught today, there's always something. Is either they don't know and want to pretend like they do know, but as I say, it's the information they've presented to us today is problematic. So, and as I say, the way in which we're connecting, I think there was a question earlier about our transformation. Well, one of the characteristics of that, interesting enough, named after one of our ancestors, is HAR1, Human Accelerated Region, and that allows that connection that you're talking about in relation to the dimensional shift, because the planets themselves, each planet has its own correlating or twin planet, understood, and so the planet Earth has one that correlates with the planet Razak or Rizq, which is in the 19th galaxy. This is 18th, Sirius, say, being the border between the 18th and the 19th galaxy, and the HAR1 gene placed within The Nagaru people, but as in other races through mixing, allows that correlation between, or us to jump between those planets as a result of that, with other things as a result. So we would need our barothry gland replaced back, so we have 9 glands as opposed to 7 endocrinal glands, two being etheric in nature, and so our gland will need to be replaced to allow the secretion of monatomic elements into the human bloodstream to transform what is being referred to as junk DNA and making it 10,000 times more potent or conductive, allowing what they consider to be supreme qualities of a supreme being in a human being, which would give us the ability, as I say, to activate some of our etheric or spiritual faculties, transmutation or transformation being one of the keys to that. So the Amun-Nabab Re'akta, as I say, was known as Tehuti. The Egyptians changed his name, or became known to the Egyptians as Tehuti or Tehutwi, Tehuti, some say, and so therefore, as I say, he is the father of alchemy, which is one of those principles of transformation. Alchemy or al-kham, you understand, the blackness, obviously is the ability to work within or transform things within natural nature, understood within the darkness as opposed to the light. So we see in our story various different findings, and this is what should be, we've got modern technology, whether you want to say it's produced by the Picasso or whatever the case may be. We've got carbon dating, we've got other different types of technologies that are able now to explore how old things are, and so certain bones being found today, I say, fly in the face of the myth and legend. I'm saying that for a reason, not to be offensive, but unproven to date. It's only been it's accepted fact because it's been around for a long time. It doesn't mean that it's actual fact. So people are, just because they're finding names of places and so on and so forth, that does not mean that the stories that they have drilled into us for many years are actually factual or correct. And this is, giving you various different bones being found, showing evidence and proof of, as I say, hominid existence well before what they're talking about in terms of 6,000 years and what they describe in that regard. And so here you see, as I say, a diagram showing the type of migration that took place out of South Africa, as I say, when those genes were placed in the Indian Ocean as they came out of South Africa, and then we migrated to various different places on the continent, and as I say, as a result of continental drift, we ended up in different parts of the planet. Excuse me. And then other races, as a result, remember, were being moved or dropped to different parts of the planet where their extraterrestrial overlords had bases, and as I say, therefore sought then to cultivate those beings in their image and after their likeness as a result of that. Understood? So we have Australopithecus, we see here 1924. Now, interesting enough, when they start depicting 2.5 million years ago, when they start depicting some of these, it's interesting when you look at some of the pictures that they make them. I'm not saying they're not monkey-like, but they make them very monkey-like and with straight hair. So the question is, well, where did the fur come from? So if your depictions are accurate, they show them depicted oftentimes with fur, also with straight hair. So the question is, if that's all the case, then where did curly hair come from, or where did kinky hair come from? If you keep depicting all of these hominids as apes or monkeys, because what happens is they depict them, as you see in the pictures, they'll depict them as monkeys, the oldest ones as monkeys, don't they? And then when it gets more European, when it gets where they can jump in and say, oh, this is European, this is where our genes link in or whatever, then all of a sudden the images transform to more human looking. The question is, well, where did the curly hair come from? You understand? Where did it come from? Where did curly hair come from? Where did kinky hair come from in your depictions? Yes, because you're not showing the afro. Leave that as a question for them. Lucy, who many are famous with, movie about that character. I think with I can't remember her name, but the other lady who plays she's in the Avengers, I think. But she's in a film called Lucy, quite an interesting movie. Yeah, it shows going backwards in time, isn't it? In terms of how you transformed into energy. A long time since I watched it, but interesting movie. So again, you're seeing that small human beings were a lot smaller in size than they are today. And these are talking about beings that are walking on 2 feet, you understand? So walking on all fours, etc. And then again, 3.2 million years old. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see, significant evidence of millions of years ago being found on the African continent, interesting enough. 7 million, I think, is the oldest one today. Old man of Chad, as they record it. Understood. So let's move on to part 2. Any questions?
Yes.
Any more questions?
Yes, we have another question from Heriberto. How long ago did they send the dolphin?
That's an interesting question because when you say how long ago, it brings some issues because the planet has gone through many changes. So obviously, in the Holy Tablets, it says 46 trillion years ago. That's what it says in the Holy Tablets. So I think we'll leave it.
Okay.
That symbolic date.
There's another question from Heriberto. How did we get from the Sans people to the indigenous people in the Southeast United States?
So Southeast United States.
That's what it says here.
What? Yeah. It's a long question. I suppose two things is that when you deal with Sans people, that's the original creation of human beings, and us as Nagarnadu Negroids. And those beings were what you would call hermaphrodites and hermaphrodites. So hermaphrodites is double gender beings, not with 2 genitalia. It's the energy or DNA of both genders. You understand, which even what the woman is today. So you have hermaphrodites. Hermaphrodites lean more towards the male end, but double gender, and then you have hermaphrodites leading towards the female side. On that side. So you got 2 of those original type beings, or what would be classified today as neutral gender or bathanoid, as we say in Wu-Sabat. Now, when another project took place referred to as Project 24, so there's a number of different projects. Season of Life here is referred to as a dolphin project, and you've got the Rainbow Project, dealt with the creation of the spheres when the planet was getting ready or prepped for our life form. For example, they had to put the spheres around the planet. It's referred to as the Rainbow Project. You've got various different projects in terms of development of our race, and even we've got the transportation of certain genes or cells being held on different planets as this planet was going through various different changes. So what happens when you're dealing with the Nefari, you're dealing with millions of years ago, and they established certain bases on not only on Earth but on various planets, Mars and other places, to store genes, so they were protected in that regard. And then what happens is you later down the line, dealing with tens and 100,000s, then the Anunnaki came along and reopened some of these old bases. So that's how they got access to some of this genetic information, and then use some of it to create their own beings in their image and after their likeness. How you're talking about, going back to the original question, so you start with the Sans people, and then something called Project 24 need to be established whereby basically we were separated out as part of Project 24 into singular gender life forms, what we call in today female and male. So male DNA came from Orion, and female DNA came from the Sirius star constellation. You see this reflected in the pyramid design, where you see that the Queen's Chamber points towards the Sirius star constellation and is associated with the deity Ashtat or Isis. And then you see that the King's Chamber is pointing towards the Orion star constellation, and that is associated with Asar or Saru, who they refer to as Osiris. Understood? And then you have another chamber pointing towards the Draco star constellation. So this is reflected in the fact, as I say, of referencing a project of now we're becoming or evolved into single cellular life forms. Now we came to the Americas by way of two situations. So we were already in the Americas, as we talked about those Sans people. And the word San, we look up in the Bible, you see it there, Tsan. Yeah, and you look up the root of its meaning. It means to migrate. So that's why they were referred to as Sans people, because it means migrate or to migrate. And this is what it's talking about. So we ended up there in the Americas by literally walking over there as the Sans people, who were referred to as the Anasazi people. The Anasazi, those are the original Native Americans. Now, when the Muslims came along, they referred to them as the Emirs. Understood? And then through a person by the name of Hu Shen, this is way later down the line, through a person named Hu Shen, they came by way of Russia, the Bering Straits, and then crossed over into the Americas and encountered the Anasazi. And because they had recessive genes or mongoloid genes, as you would have it, having 47 chromosomes, they sought to mix in with us to assist them with that particular defect, which gave birth to the Hopi American Indians. This was the first, I suppose, organized or controlled gene mixing or interceptions. But us as Anasazi, who were also later became known as the Olmecs, we didn't allow those sub-races or even other races to mix in with us. So we said, okay, the sub-races we created, they can go down and stay in South America, and we will stay in North America. Understood? And so that mixture became known, or what they produced became known as the Incas. Understood? And so you have Emirs, or which means rulers in Arabic, which they were referring to the Olmecs or the Anasazi, and then you have Incas. When you put the two together, you get Amir Inca or America. That's where the name itself comes from. Now the two continents, by way of a large explosion I'm going into today, which is the true Atlantis story, got separated. Understood? And so there you end up with North and South America, which the original word Atlantis comes from a Sabaic word Alalantwi, and TWI means jaw. Understood? So the two continents were separated. It's the Americas today. Understood? Hence why you see the word Atlanta very close in sound to Atlantis, because that is where the term comes from, because Atlan from the word Utla means to vacate. So when we had one continent, we used to walk or go to that particular part of the planet. We used to go there on vacation, go there on holiday. Now when the land masses got separated, we used to sail, we used to fly in crafts, and move there in that way. And so this is why you see they talk about Egypt or ancient Egypt of the East. What they don't talk about is the Egypt of the West. Understood? Where we had our culture there, or similar culture, when you look at it, or correlating culture over there, and why you have certain American cities that are named after Egyptian cities, isn't like Memphis. Kentucky is phonetically really King Tut City, Harlem, and certain places, as I say, which have ancient Egyptian city nomes or names of their cities. You understood? And so we are in the Americas as the original Native Americans. Understood? The American Indians are, remember, as a result of that original mixture that we talked about, which is the Chinese and us as the Anasazi. And then once they went down, or they were sent down into South Africa and then inhabited places like Vietnam, so on and so forth, the Dravidians then became a mixed in an uncontrolled fashion with those then subspecies, and that gave birth to the various different types of American Indians that you refer to as. So you've got American Indians who are mixed. This is why they have similar hair, fur, to the Chinese, and then you've got black Native Americans, understood like the Yamasee tribe, who are linked to the Jamasi, for example, in West Africa, who have come there by way of migration. So how then we have ended up in the Americas, obviously, is in this last iteration, which created that interception and created what you're referring to as the Negro. So a 400-year interception, torture, rape, mental conditioning, intermixing, forcibly intermixing, as far as miscegenation, has ended up transforming those original genes into a new type of black person referred to as the Negro. Understood? And so that's how and today we were transported there by way of kidnapping. And so in various ways, that is how we've ended up from Africa over into the Americas. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, we have a raised hand. Adam T, your hand is raised. I'm going to allow you to talk and ask your question. I'm going to unmute your microphone now. You may speak. Do you have a question? If you need to ask a question, you need to make sure that your microphone is unmuted. Your hand is raised. Okay.
Yeah, don't be shy. We'll try and help you out as best we can.
There is another question from Divine. It says, when was the human beast created in related to what we are discussing today? In relation to what we are discussing today?
Yeah, good question. I suppose the culmination is 3761 BC. Really, that would be the perfected date of that individual. Now, there's been various different experiments that have taken place beforehand. If we looked at our chart, two particular interceptions. So you're looking at obviously the Pleiadians there, and also the Draconians or the Anunnaki. Understood? So you've got kind of two routes. So you've only got the red, what's considered to be the red seed and the white seed. So the red seed is a derivative of or coming out of the Hindu or the Dravidian, and then you got the white seed, which is a result of Barassi or leprosy, leproma. So as a very specific disease that attacked that genome, which we have various, and it's basically the Bible, I think, refers to it as an old leprosy, but it's symbolic of, let's say, a form of genetic warfare which was put together by the Pleiadians, by certain agreeable Anunnaki in the form of Inki or Nudimud, and then working with us as Muhammatu, or the ancient Egyptians in the form of Taha, or people refer to as Ta, where they formulated, as I say, this disease to attack, to place it, not attack, but place it within the Mukasu genome, so that when these Draconians who used to see the Pleiadians as a food source, now the Pleiadians are pale-skinned, but range into between 8 and 9 feet in height. They created a being in their image and after their likeness, referred to as the Adamite, and that was designed so that they could replace themselves to the Draconians as the food source. But obviously they sought to wipe out their oppressors, as they would have it, and so we worked with them at that particular stage to infect those Mukasu genes in order to, as I say, take out the Draconians, who were, as I say, certain different species that were causing up problems here on the planet Earth. So hence why when you see us referencing, or you see the Master Teacher certainly referencing them and saying, oh, he is a disease, he is unnatural, these types of terminology, whatever, people are looking at it from a point of view and thinking it's racist or racial statements or racial denigrations of those particular individuals, not understanding actually it goes back to their story and how they came around, and how they were produced as well. I'm not going to get fully into the Pleiadian story, but originally, remember, they stole the design from beings from Arcturus, and it caused a big war and problems. So they didn't go through the millions of years, for example, that you're looking at the Riskians of where we have grown with the planet being designed, optimized through the planet. They didn't go through the millions of years of, or trillions of years of growth, overstood on into millions of years. And the reason why we're talking about different dates is because the planet itself, remember, the time is based upon, isn't it, the size of the planet and its motion around the sun. Obviously, we've got around about 5-day orbit around the sun, which we call a year, and then the planet revolving around its own axis, which happens at 23 hours, 56 minutes and 6 seconds. When you talk about, remember, the planet was crashed into, isn't it, 24 billion years ago, so it's different size to what it is now. So when you start talking about time and dates, remember, as it's recorded in the Sumerian story, Tiamat, or the planet, remember, was 2.5 times the size it is now. So remember, you've got a different orbit, you've got a different, what you would calculate as a day, overstood. So there's different times. So when somebody says, oh, how old it is, it's a different, you know what I'm saying? It's different to the time that we're talking about here now on Earth. So we have to start thinking in that regard of how time is calculated here on the planet Earth. So that, remember, is the original formulation of how you get, as I say, the two. So one is based upon in the image and after light of Pleiadians, and then one is an altered being by way of disease. And that disease, was to say, was placed in the genome originally to try and take out those Draconians, which caused a war on this planet as well. Understood? And it's one of the reasons in the same why we obviously had to then formulate a new calendar on the Dendora star map based upon a new axis, obviously, that the planet got shifted onto a 23.5 degree axis. And so a new calendar was necessary because everything that was based on that previous alignment, it caused a lot of explosions, because we were masters at that time of what is being classified today as solar biology and lunar biology, or outformational knowledge that enabled us to use energy from different star systems to power various different structures that we had here on Earth. Similar today, like we use the power of one sun, i.e. the 193 million miles away, our sun, to power water heating, power electrical generations, for example. But at that time, we had mastered how to use energy from, I say, different star constellations. This is why we had a map that was logging the movement of the axis of the planet, because obviously different types of energy would optimize what we could use it for at a certain time. So obviously when the planet got hit on its axis, or moved off of its axis, then all of those alignments don't work anymore unless the planet rotates into a certain position. So let's say a new calendar had to be created, referred to as a Dora star map, which in their mythology now becomes, or a version of it becomes, what you refer to as astrology. So all that is to say that is 6,000 years ago is when the human beast we would describe as a kind of man, or mankind. That's when their story starts from, although various different experimentation took place beforehand. As you know, one of the older aspects to that genetic experiment or design is the flugel rods. understood, which is slightly about 1,000 years older than the one being created around 6,000 years ago. So around 6,000 years, and that's where history or his story starts from, which is why they like to correlate everything, at least from a religious sense, to that start date, because that is where they came along. That is the true Adam. We say the human beast, that is Adam. Yeah, from the word Edom, it means red or ruddy. Understood? So the fur man. Any other questions?
I see no further questions.
No further questions.
Okay. Right. Let's get back to where we were. So, right. So one of the things, just it's a bit of a reminder, I suppose, for most, is that where we were talking about natural law in the last class, and maybe we've gone on a few different things, but I prefer that when people are asking questions, because it at least helps with our understanding. I've got an issue with answering questions to do with previous classes as well, if it brings greater clarity. So not a problem at all. Now, one of the things that's important to understand is particularly for, I know there's different people of different races and hues on the phone, etc. Not a problem to what we're dealing with here. But when we're speaking about the Nagaru race or Nagaru race of Negroids, one of the things that's important to understand is not just a case of us when we're rebuilding ourselves back to this kind of supreme state. One of the things that Nine Ball the Nine Ball series is imparting upon us is that because of our melanin and because of our link to who our ancestors are, these Panatharu, we're not just part of the system of nature. We are part of the system of nature that sets the standards of higher or the highest level of living, because if we are the ones, by way of the melanin, by way of that manifestation of that blackness, can vibrate higher than any of the other races, then we set the standard of what nature is supposed to represent. And so therefore our influence on the interaction with other beings on this planet means that we should be the example of that, because there's no other being that can reach the heights that we can reach. And so we're not just subject to the environment, we are the environment. This is important to understand. You know, we're not just they talk about Nawep Mukwan, obviously, or supreme, or Nawep Mukwano, yeah, supreme beings. It's because we existed outside of what is being called nature. Remember, reminding you that nature, remember, is a reactive system that was created by, obviously, beings to facilitate, obviously, various different forms of life within Pa'ut, which is within Pa'ut. Yeah, so within the all, which is within all. Understood? And so reminding ourselves of how we're structured, understood? So here it's expressing to us the fact that, you understand, obviously 24% of our DNA is in a dynamic state. So it's constantly changing based on the environment. So two people can be in the room together, and the fact that they're breathing means that our DNA has been altered. It's not a static set of programming as the Mukasu teachings would have us believe. Now here you see this 76% of jumping DNA is also interacting, as I say, with this what they call morphic field, yeah, which is a kind of vast geometric etheric fields that surround our planet and hold shape information for species. And obviously because of this interaction, the fact that we're reading this doctrine, the fact that we are learning the language, the fact that we are learning the culture, expressing the culture through us reading and expressing it in a soulful way, means that it makes it easier then for the generations that are coming down the line to now take on board the new cycle information. If you remember, episodes have been around for 40, 30 years or whatever, it was more difficult to talk to people about certain subjects when you mention about Jesus and Muhammad and different things of that nature. As time has gone on, human beings' mind has opened up a lot more to extraterrestrials, to talking about spirituality as it pertains to the breath or improving the human health system and so on and so forth. This has been the fact of those teachings and the interception, so on and so forth, and introduction of this information altering the morphic theory, you understand? Because say this is where the human being design and design of all species is being held. So the DNA, in fact, DNA doesn't store shape information. Understood? What's happening is that when those genes or cells are placed into the right areas, they then communicate with the morphic field, and for lack of a better word, they download that information so that it can then be used to, okay, I need to grow into a heart, I need to grow into a kidney, so on and so forth. So as you know, stem cells are undesignated. When they're then placed in the right area, then they download their programming. So it's amazing that when you see things, this man invented the internet or whatever, that actually, when you look at or understand how nature system works, the system's actually based upon many of the things that we use, and you see that that correlation in that regard. The point being made is that, to come back around again, is that we're interacting with part of the environment. Understood? And so us being not aligned with natural nature is unnatural for us, because nature is expecting us as the supreme beings in this incarnation is to set those standards of things. Understood? This is why we have such a heavily influencing factor around the world when we do anything. And so if you want to call that soul, because we have that, whenever we do anything, it just takes over. Now, unfortunately for us, that power has been understood and has been misused in a way where the new cycle in the 70s, which was or the new mindset that came in the 70s, which was designed, as I say, to disrupt the influence of the Mukasu, or the human beast, for the last 6,000 years, and required a more aggressive type of individual, a seek and destroy type mentality, something that would a being with our mindset that would go against the grain, because we'd been taught so much we didn't even want to look directly in the eye of our oppressor. So it needed a new type of mindset. Hence, the characteristics of that was people going against the so-called status quo, i.e. turning their hat backwards. Understood? Repurposing words like bad and making it mean good. You understand? These are all characteristics of us that were going against the grain to break away from the control of the spell that had been imparted upon us certainly in the last 6,000 years, but more acutely for us right now in the various different slave or kidnappings that took place. And we must remember, for all that kind of pointing the finger at the Mukasu or the Caucasian, we cannot forget the Arabs' role in all of this. So this alignment with Islam, which is certainly prevalent in a lot of the prison systems at the moment, and people, let's say, coming out seemingly thinking they're going against Caucasianity in the form of Christianity, and then run into Islam as this other alternative. It's the same spider's web. So any religion or culture that oppressed our people, is not the solution for us. Any religion that oppresses our people is not the religion for us. It cannot be the spirituality for us, because it has the hallmarks of, as I say, the human beast within the culture, and it has those oppressive aspects within the culture. More importantly, it's not aligning you with your ancestral forces. It's aligning you with ancestral forces that are designed to work against you. Understood? And so you have to, according to nature's rules, nature's race rules, you have to work with what is for your race. Understood? And the racial code says that the suppression of another race to further your own race is against the racial code. Understood? So we have to understand that we are integral in the environment. Understood? And we have so when you talk about us making various decisions, and we were touching upon this last week, and it's very interesting that you see certain characters in the media, what you might call political commentators and various different people, even some people cast in movies in certain roles or whatever, that they're, let's say, and that we stay out of people's bedrooms in Wu-Sabat, but when you hear a lot of people talking, you hear a lot of people talking about racial issues, and then their partner is of a different race, for example. If that person is not necessarily dealing, if that's all they're talking about, so somebody, for example, will be talking about racial issues, but let's say they're married to a white partner. Now, we're not interested in whether you want to marry a white partner or who you fall in love with. You fall in love with anybody. That's not of interest. What is of interest is what is the influencing factor that's causing you to speak? Is it sincere? Because when somebody's taken upon the genes of certain people and they're speaking, seemingly speaking against the race, but then your individual choice doesn't reflect the group choice, understood, then one might question the sincerity. It doesn't mean that I can't listen to what you got to say, but you're only operating from a point of knowledge and not operating from a point of wisdom. So wisdom, it being the application of knowledge. So if, not saying that everybody, all decisions, you must be the primary example of everything that you speak about, but if that's the only thing you're known for, then you're not holistic. And the question is, why are you just speaking on that subject alone? Is it out of guilt? Because there's ancestral plays going on inside an individual, and so they may be speaking on those issues, but then the individual choice is not reflecting those issues. So we have to understand that when we talked in terms of last class, where we're talking about individual, the justice system and individual choices, and then we're talking about race choices, that there's always two things going on. So you're making decisions for yourself as an individual, but if you then respond to the messaging that needs to then heal and restore and elevate our race, then you're also making racial decisions. You're making decisions based for the race. And Nine Ball expresses that what is best for the individual is not always best for the race, but what is best for the race is always best for the individual. And so at certain points we're operating with those two things at hand, because as we recognized in the rules of justice being applied, we're all linked racially. That's why true, what may classify as letting somebody off the hook or forgiveness can only be done within the person's own race anyway, because basically the result of that falls within the race as a regard, not necessarily always on the individual. If the individual can't satisfy the rules of justice, then it's going to fall upon the individual's race. So what happens is that when they are promoting and teaching miscegenation, for example, it is not for the purpose of, if it's just a case of, human beings has fallen in love with other human beings, then so be it. The issue is that somebody or them had an agenda, not only to correct their own deficiencies within their DNA, deficiencies within their DNA, but also because whether the individual that the person's messing with knows it or not, obviously they don't, because they've been brainwashed a lot of the times, but they're mixing in to cause confusion, to seek to delay the distribution of fair distribution of justice, because you're now mixing in with the people that need or demand justice, because those are the victims in this regard. So there is a lot of sacrifices that need to be made in us as these early generations of receiving the new cycle information, where we have to think more racial. You understand? We've been designed and programmed to kind of, in this society, to serve all others, to acquiesce ourselves to all other races. And then when we try to do stuff on our own, people try and accuse us of, oh, they're being racist, they're being this. Yeah, they don't want us to have nothing for ourselves. Even Black Panther, they were complaining in Black Panther there was an all black cast. You understand? I mean, how many films have we seen where there's been no black people or people of any other race in the movie? Still, okay, cool. You know what I mean? I'll try and get into the story. Understood? But when we try to do stuff for ourselves, there's always somebody to complain. Understood? Because the beings themselves are of low intelligence. Yeah, free, as it was described out of the original 999, which is out of 1,000. Yeah, perfect number is 1,000. So their mindset being that in that animal state can't see justice, can't see rules being applied in the same way to other races. Their mindset is that in that lower animal state, which is only those who look like me, only members of my tribe. I can only show compassion to those who look like my daughter, or those who look like my son, or those who look like my auntie or my cousin, so on and so forth. And justice cannot be applied like that. This is one of the reasons why you see in nature it is automatic. You understand? There's no conscious decision making at that level. Understood? It is a reactive state. So those rules kick in, and some human beings say, well, I like that person, so therefore I'll apply the rules in that situation. I like that person, therefore I don't apply or I don't like that person, so I apply the rules more harshly in that situation. No, it's meted out accordingly to those rules, because this is what we see. The just us system means injustice for us. So we are treated unjustly in their system. If you think about it, even in the case with the master teacher, if I was to show the case on Pesa, they couldn't get in the so-called sex charges. They couldn't find any evidence for the first 2 years or whatever. So they lowered the threshold and started to use the word intent. Go on Pesa, look up the case, you'll see it there. So they lowered the threshold. They couldn't find any physical evidence of what they would refer to as molestation. So they changed it then to intent. Oh, he had the intent to do it. Lowering the threshold. In order to do that in their laws, because remember, we have rules in nature and they have laws. And then in order to basically maintain their injustice system so it works for them, they create the rule of law as they have it. You understand? So it's going against nature's rules. So in that particular case, the reason why I say that is because they lowered the threshold and used something called racketeer influence, corrupt organizations, to lower the threshold of proof, and said, okay, well, the organization was designed to do this and you were the head of that. Interesting enough, yeah, all the way 18 some odd years ago, just to get the man off the streets. You understand? And sealed all the transcripts so that the world can't see. Well, hold on a minute. You can't hold the trial on Martin Luther King's birthday according to American rules. Oh, hold on a minute. The judge who was in a previous case involving the master teacher's family, he's not allowed to preside on a case because, or in this case as a judge, because he was previously a prosecutor in that case. He can't preside over this case, which he lost, because he's got a conflict of interest. But in Middle District, Georgia, they see they can get away with these things. And the reason why I say that is because that same RICO system, why hasn't it been applied to all Hollywood studios? All Hollywood studios were known, for example, as places that manipulated women, overstood, for sexual favors in order to get parts as movies, in order to get parts in films, in order to get jobs, to make them movie stars, so on and so forth. This is something that has been going on for decades. So why didn't the FBI, for example, when the Me Too movement came out, why weren't they on the heads of all of these different studios, then basically using the RICO on them and then clawing back all monies, all property, all things that were then funded by way of women being exploited, understood, in order to meter out a proper justice? Because it's a known fact, isn't it, that directors, movie stars, they give you one, as in Harvey Weinstein, but it was going on, it was a known thing within that particular culture. Understood? So that was a RICO violation. If the organisation was set up, understood, to manipulate people, men and women even in the case, to bring them in sexual favours, and I'll make you a star, sexual favours, and I'll do this for you, so on and so on and so forth. Understood? And they get away with the Me Too movement. And funnily enough, who ends up being the scapegoat? The main names out of the Me Too movement are black people, isn't it? In their system of justice. Yeah, the scapegoat dogma, which we talked about. How is Bill Cosby, have we had power? Have we had power over the media? Have we had power over Hollywood all these years? We're still talking about representation today. So how is the principal architect or the principal perpetrator out of the Me Too movement, if we find it's a black person? And we don't own any of the studios. We don't own any of the TV networks. Understood? So the scapegoat dogma or the scapegoat positioning, understood, for them to avoid justice is real. Yeah, and that's not to say that, you know what I mean, black men are perfect and they've never taken advantage of women in the TV and music industry, so on and so forth. That's not. And whoever is indulging in those behaviours and gets called out for it, and then is put through, I don't know, so-called justice system, if there's proper proof, evidence or whatever, then you want a system that at least delivers best evidence. You want an environment where people at least can come forward and say what happened at the time. You come 20 years later, stories are going to change, memories are going to be different, so on and so forth. So it should promote best evidence. It should promote, come forward, flag this thing at the time that it's happening. Do you understand? Get justice at the time it's happening. Not as they use it now, as it's weaponized. It's weaponized, designed to attack the races. It's weaponized in a way that the people who should have got justice, no, we're going to use this scapegoat character in order for it to appear like we've dealt with the Me Too movement. And as long as that person gets done, he's not of our race, but Moore's time, then how is the prominent names in the media? It's Bill Cosby, Russell Simmons, so on and so forth. They got one, Harvey Weinstein. How many studio owners, directors of movies, so on and so forth, or people who are in that industry have manipulated and not? Very few got called out. Very few have got the kind of media attention. And then they use people like comics, who then take the mickey out of these individuals, and it basically feeds into that scapegoat positioning. Understood? Yes, but yet their president, he can have that and he can still be president. So the rules of justice don't meter itself accordingly across the board, and it creates a problem within nature's system. Yeah, unjustice, or just us, but it's unjust for us. Yeah, you see it in reverse. So this is the problem that it creates for us, and hence why you have to have a separation, almost in a sense, or we have to get back and separate ourselves. The reason why they want to stay close is because any type of punishment that is due to be delivered on them, if we're close enough, we're going to be affected by the same thing as well. Understood? And so this is why they keep you close. They don't keep you close because they want you to be there. They keep you close so that as a protection for them. Like, you know, in war situations or whatever, when they put children and families in certain bases or whatever, so that they can stop. If people are following the rules of engagement or war, you try to limit civilian casualties. So this is what we're being used for in this regard. This is why they always attack teachers who talk about a back to Africa message. Yes, because back to Africa means you separating yourself from them and you go and living in places that are so hot that they may find it difficult to operate or be comfortable within those environments. So they attack those leaders and teachers that promote that, you understand, and leave alone the ones that stay in America, or that now today, in the time that we've moved in right now, are still promoting the monotheistic religions, because in those religions are the hallmarks, as I say, They have the features and the mindset of the Caucasian race. And this is why the Nine Ball was pointing out to us to say, if you understand the spirit forces behind the Bible and the Quran, you will understand the mindset of the Caucasian race. Understand? And so you got to look at those, re-look at those stories. I'm not saying that you don't have to understand all of those monotheistic religions to get into Wu-Sabat. We went through that as a process of what they refer to as an antidote, as the medicine necessary for those of us who've been raised in those schools, because you need a bit of the poison as part of the cure. Understood? But the new people coming up today don't necessarily need to reread all of that, you understand, dogma and doctrine, unless you've obviously walked through those schools and gone through it, and then need to address that in some way. But as I say, when you understand the nature of who the God is, and then what he was instructing those individuals to do, so Wu-Sabat is designed to give you the confidence to start to question those things, to put your reasoning ability and powers to start questioning, and know that no fireball, no lightning is going to come down out of the heavens and lick you down because you've questioned, let's say, what they have taught about God, what they've taught about the Most High, so on and so forth. Understood? Within their books, unproven stories today, now in modern times, must be classified as myth and legend. You understand? No more accurate than Harry Potter, Philosopher's Stone, or you understand, whatever the various different movies that J.K. Rowling put out today. I'm saying any other movies of that type that are based upon certain incidents, certain stories, using real names of places and so on and so forth, in order to give a sense of reality or grounding to a fictional story. So we are the environment by way of our DNA, and one of the things is that in understanding as well, that as we broke down last time, when we talk about the darkness of space, etc., you see that dark energy makes up 76% within existence, 24% is dark matter, and then that further then breaks down all of the things that we see, i.e. suns, planets, so on and so forth, that we see out in terms of the physical environment, that in itself is only makes up 10% of the visible universe. You understand? So the darkness as we would have it today far outseeds what we call in light. Light is only a small fraction, you understand, within existence, a very small fraction of what we actually see. So they're not equal. They're not equal. Understood? Yes, they are two different things. The darkness is eternal. It cannot be broken down in part. It is all. The light is temporary. It comes on and it can go out. Darkness doesn't go out. Understood? And which one do we represent? So the ignorance is because a lot of those hidden rules or whatever, they've not been apparent to us because we've paid it little or no mind. Remember, it's been replaced or overlaid or separated with the justice system. Understood? Yes? Justice system, a mechanical, a man-made justice system which seeks to profit. Imagine that. The system seeks to profit off of justice and still call it fair. How does a human being end up in prison for not paying a parking ticket? How does a human being end up being overcharged money for parking for where the infrastructure has already been paid for thousands and thousands of times over by way of people's taxes? So they like to profit off of justice, profit off of prisons, profit off of but still call it fairness. Now you notice that we didn't have prisons in ancient Egypt. We didn't have prisons. So if a person breached certain rules amongst us to the point where they were exhibiting traits that where there was no real hope of reform in that regard, then you can't live amongst the gods. We'll kick you out of heaven, so to speak. Yeah, so we put them out. Yeah, you can't live amongst us with that vibration. Not to say that there wasn't a lot of reformation going on. If a person decided that, hey, I'm going to keep disturbing the peace and I'm not going to reform, then they can't live amongst us. And remember, that could only have happened at a certain point in time where other genetics started to be, foreign genetics came in and started to mix in with us. Because in their recording of our stories, one of those, remember, is the Osiris and Set story, isn't it? And you get a whole thing surrounding the conflict between Osiris and Set, as they have it, and then moving on to Horus and Set. But as the master pointed out, when you look at where they came from, isn't it? From Atum, who birthed Tefnut, and Shu gave birth to Geb, and I'm saying the old names for the purpose of the people on the call. Geb and Nut, and then it gave birth to who then gave birth to Asar or Osiris, Isis, and then Set and Nephthys. Yeah, using the old terms for people on the call. Remember, they're all coming from the same gene pool. Yes. So where did the disagreeable element come in from? It can't if they all come from the same gene pool. So the way in which the story has been worded, obviously, is obviously symbolic, and we know there's elements of symbolism around the way that story has been given, and over and in time, the real story of that obviously will be uncovered. You understand, in certain places, but that's showing you how does this disagreeable element come in. It has to come in by way of, as I say, foreign interceptions into the genes. And so you have to track back what is taking place in the darkness. Don't get tricked and fooled with all this talk about, oh, our race is not taking responsibility and get over slavery and get over this, get over that. No, not when justice is outstanding. We ain't getting over nothing. Justice, if it's natural, justice must be served before a person can heal and properly recovered. Not justice means black people wipe it out your mind and let us get on and get along with everybody, as you know what I mean, and let life continue by us holding everything in. We're holding not only the victim, but now we're having to hold the justice unsatisfied from the perpetrator as well. So no, our thing now is that we must get out of the way to allow justice to take place, to justice to be satisfied. If we are in the way, then justice is delayed, because we can't get to the people or the perpetrators that it needs to be placed upon. So our thing, or what we've been taught, is to get out of the way. It's nothing to do with us. Let them suffer the fate that they deserved for the actions that, as I say, their ancestors, and even still to today, still perpetrate against other races, namely ourselves. We were not created to be their subservient. We were not created, as I say, to be the cure to their ailments. They need to take that matter up with those who created them, not us. Now, any other questions?
No outstanding questions.
So in terms of the system or the environment, as I say, is part of what is being described as a larger plan, natural plan, governed by these our ancestors and the Tharu, who govern the growth and assist with the growth and development of universes, And we see, as I say, part of our plan in the environment is that Project 24, as it was classified as, in terms of the restoration of our solar system, is based upon this number, so it keeps popping up, 24,000 genomes. In that regard, obviously the planet is roughly about 24,000 miles in circumference, rounded down, understood, and then we see 24 constellations, or 12, they say 12, but each one of them obviously has a positive and a negative element. We've got 24 constellations in that regard. So this number's coming back around again, and it says marked within our DNA and our genes, literally, understood, in that regard. So yeah, a significant number as it pertains to stuff in relation to the planet Earth on this planet, which you can see from this particular diagram, that our ancestors is counted from the outside in, not from the inside out. So yeah, everything they do is the opposite of what is in nature. There's a third rock from the sun, but in actuality we are counting from the outside in, understood? So we refer to this as zone 6 or sector 6, zone 3, you understand, which would be here in terms of the third positioning, you understand, or orbit, cycle or route around the sun, and then the whole of it is referred to as district 24 or sector 24, you understand, in terms of that project of male and female DNA now sequencing on the planet to produce, as I say, single gender beings alongside nutrigender beings. So natural justice, as it should provide those three, at least provide those three attributes there. So justice, i.e., when I say justice, is not just us. So it can't be, the system can't be biased where it is just for your race. Now some people might say, well, that's a bit of a contradiction, Nabab, because you're talking all this black talk, black this, black that. The reason why the masters say no one wins a race in racism, but then to address what we've been through, you have to be racist. You understand? It doesn't have to be racism in the sense of us putting our foot on the necks of the Mukasu to get up. No, we don't need them to do that. Understood? But there has to be a redress, you understand, in terms of the way the cure is applied. The mind has to be rebalanced back again. Understood? It's like, again, say a domestic violence victim. If you listen to their conversations, maybe they're doing counselling or any of the sessions that the victims or victim needs to go through, it's going to sound anti-men. It's going to sound very matriarchal. It may sound at times where the man is the enemy, but that's because the mindset of the individual has been such damaged by the torture that they still may be feeling subservient to that male energy and needs rebalancement. So what to the outside ignorant looker may look like an extreme of a certain position is actually helping to rebalance the person again. Understood? Which is why the same individual can talk about race issues and then turn around and say, well, no one wins a race in racism. It's about race unity. It's not about racism, it's about race unity. Understood? But that requires us in our natural vibration to be ourselves. We can be ourselves, then we can come and chill and mix with other races, as long as we're being ourselves. We're not coming in contact with other races and feeling like, oh, but I need to act a certain way because I don't want to look bad in front of, you understand, these particular individuals or people or whatever the case may be. You understand? Or feel embarrassment. No, you should act the way you act because those are the standards expected by your rules, by your codes, by your culture, by your ethics that you live by. And your own people will judge you by those things, not what it looks like to other races. So your voice, if you've got bass in your voice, it should not be going up 2 and 3 octaves when you come in contact with other people. We should not have to find ourselves, because we're expressive, as you hear me on this phone right now. We're not aggressive. So it's on other individuals of other races to be culturally aware of the nature of us, understood, and not deal with their own inadequacies, which is what we have to now in this society. We have to play a certain, let's say, role in order to survive. And this creates a separation in our being. Now, some people use terms like imposter syndrome and all these different types of stuff. No, basically, we're imitating and acting in the image and after the likeness of the beast, which is what those books were making reference to, or the beast like man. And we cannot fulfill our potential, as I say, in that way. And it's unnatural in nature, natural laws, for us, as I say, to be acting, understood, yes, which is acting in the image and after another race, when our genes have been programmed differently. So we need justice, not just us, but justice in accordance to how nature's rules work. We need facts and truth. We as a people, we didn't live by lies. We didn't live by mythology. Our symbology and the way it was used was to protect information, to keep it away from fools who may misuse it. Understood? So we use symbolism as a form of protection. We changed our names as a form of protection, not as a form of deception, which is what they do, or the Luciferians do. They had to change the first and the surname to hide their bloodlines. Yes, but we live by facts, is what we get back to. And then equity is when all races are able to be themselves and express themselves. So true equality is that we can be equal to or greater than other races when the environment or the playing field is fair. Any differences between the races, i.e. that we're genetically programmed in, we're not responsible for that. Go and talk to your gods. Go and talk to your overlords. Go and talk to your extraterrestrials and take it up with them. We're not the solution for their frailties unless we choose to be so. In certain times, we may have offered ourselves or offered certain genes to help in certain situations. Now, maybe that could argue to be our detriment, but we don't judge our ancestors by today's morals for actions that they took in the past. Whatever they decided to do back then was in the full knowledge and responsibility of what they were dealing with. Hence why, as we explained previously, they had certain control mechanisms that they put in place, because they know continued mixing in that regard would mess up the genome. You understand? Because it's called recessive and other recessive people. If they mix together, it causes much more recessive genes within the whole of the human genome, which is bad for the human race. You understand? Hence why, understand those rules, one has to take responsibility to uphold them, because as human beings, we've got the ability to override decisions which may be in our best interests. You understand? So we have the ability to self-destruct. You understand? Because of our willpower. We don't have free will, we have will. We don't have free will. Free will would mean that you're able to take those decisions and then there's no consequences as a result in nature. And we understand that there are consequences as a result of our actions that we take in nature, even if we just done some things the one time. Yeah, if those rules kick in, they're in. Yeah, and they don't take into account, oh, this was the first time, or the person done it innocently, so on and so forth. That requires somebody to be sitting over it in terms of judgment. And as I say, why, if your God or your Most High or all these different or your Allah, all these different terminologies and titles is sitting there over certain things, then why is a baby, innocent baby, for example, getting sick, understood, and from the actions maybe of you know what I mean, their parents, or within decisions made by their generations or whatever, but some killer and some drug dealer who has basically lived off of their people allowed to live. You understand? It would make it look like within the system where their God has no power to change the things that are wrong or the things that are negative. Why is he not intervening in this situation? Understood? So you are having to grow up as a people and move away from those myths, move away from those legends, and really understand into an overstanding how it all hangs together, how it all works, and more importantly, what is your individual and collective responsibility as a race to fix it? Because you can't look to any other race to fix it for you. Only a fool would allow their justice to rest on the emotions or the soul of a Caucasian. Only a fool. They can't give you justice. Now, the 9 doctrines of Tehuti. I'm only going to cover this briefly because we ain't going to have to go into in loads of detail because we only got 23 minutes left because of my rabbiting on. But the 9 doctrines, these are again, 9 ball, very important set of books, but it's been distributed out through the Right Knowledge series and even in books today. It's still in there in its various different forms. When it was originally released in the 60s, it was in a very raw form. Now, those who may be more familiar with the hereafter doctrine and thereafter doctrines, it reads obviously a lot more clearly because of the work that the master teachers been putting in over these years and how they've slowed him down in the last 18 years. Because remember, as a teacher, it was like, okay, boom, I read this book, I can go see him Saturday and ask that question, I can ask this question. He was available, unlike other leaders. He was amongst his people. Yeah, Pops, I need to know, in this book on page da-da-da-da-da, you said da-da-da, what does that mean? So the power of that being taken away for 18 years in this hereafter doctrine has been significant. It's slowed us down. It hasn't eradicated it, but it's slowed down what can be. But you can't stop it. People are breaking the spell. Genetic explosions are still happening, even on various books that we thought we'd mastered. Then boom, the master comes again and boom, takes it to another level. So the Amun Nabab Rayachata, understood, is the same being the Egyptians referred to as Tehuti, understood. So it's a seat, but it's as well as an individual. When the individual came, as we know, he was from the Sirius star constellation and landed when he came here or arrived here on Earth in a place referred to as Hermopolis, you understand, or Chemenu, some refer to as, which is one of the names they refer to as the 8 Octorods. Yeah, us in the water, when we were in the waters before we came on to land, as what the Greeks refer to as the Enneads, so the 9 stages of being as opposed to 8. You understand? This is 4 sets of, or 4 pairs of male and female, understood, each one of them representing, as I say, genetic shifts within our human genome after various different events or calamities, one may say, have taken place on the planet Earth, many of them being meteorite strikes, some naturally occurring, some as a result of extraterrestrial intervention or wars taking place. So we see here that Tehuti, yeah, the symbol wearing a mask of the ibis bird, excuse me, has a number of different attributes. Yeah, so Grand Hierophant Ba'h Yaanuwn, the highest high priest, keeper of the secret doctrines. You understand? Interesting enough, look, the records of this is what the secret doctrines are. The records of existence and destiny. So this is the secret doctrines. Understood? Yeah. Existence and destiny. He is the keeper of time, named by the ancient Egyptians. Yeah. So this is who date back, let's say, over 10,500 years. You understand? Here we see deity of writing, science, medicine, inventor of alchemy, magic, originally named either Tehuti or Tehuti. So this is our Amun Nabab Arei Akhtar, and you see there, I think the 56 deity on the 99 plus 1 deities in the prayer system, which is where the Muslims took their 99 attributes of plus 1 attributes of Allah, and where they got the periodic table from. And you see here, O one who is this twice. Interesting enough. Now, I remember the Greeks referred to him as Hermes, and I think the Romans referred to him as Thoth, or 3 times great. You understand? Thoth, 3 times great. So because of the many different times that he, in their mythology, that he came around. So the fact of the matter is, it's a seat and it's a person. So when we say it's a seat, just for the layman's layperson's understanding, right, somebody can influence something so significantly that their name lives on throughout the ages. So if you think about, and I'm not comparing him to this individual that I'm going to mention, but it's the same type of thing. So you think about the person who invented the vacuum cleaner. Yeah, there was a product that was so significant that exhibited the vacuum cleaner. It was called a Hoover, correct? Which is named after the person whose company or who invented the Hoover. And so much so that even those different makes of it, people will still refer to it in certain instances. They will call it a Hoover, they don't call it a vacuum cleaner. And this is because the person or that invention was so significant, and the branding and the marketing of it, so on and so forth, has stuck in the minds of the people that they refer to it as a Hoover, even though that vacuum cleaner may be made by, you understand, several different companies. They're referring to it by the name of the individual as opposed to what it is. And so in our culture, certain individuals at one time were so significant to our culture that their name has lived through the ages, and certain systems have been designed to maintain their position and approach throughout the ages, to aid our understanding of our connection between us, nature, and Panatharu. Because obviously, as children of Panatharu, our ascension pathway is to transform into them, back to obviously us being 720 degree beings again, having mastery of the physical 360 and having mastery of the esoteric 360. Understood? So these doctrines, or 9 doctrines, are designed to, as I say, help us to understand, particularly how things within existence works, and to take better control of our destiny, which we might call our lives in this and then obviously beyond. Yes? And so it challenges our thinking to use these tools in a way to help us not only understand, but to take control or advantage of these attributes, these energies within nature to our advantage. Understood? Yeah? And staying at the same time, respecting what they are, staying within those rules, but being able to utilize them, you understand, for our betterment. And understanding helps us to address and ensure justice is delivered appropriately, because we're not interpreting the rules based on some man's translation of a book who was not of our race. We're basing it on decisions made and recorded by our ancestors, many times through years, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, into trillions of years of observation, which is why it's important to keep records. You understand? Certain times when we're doing things to the people, we don't like to plan or invest in planning, writing certain things down, on paper, and certain things, or organizing or keeping records of meetings or minutes when we're running business. You understand? I mean, sometimes people having, not saying all of our people, but sometimes these are attributes of not keeping proper records. And that type of indiscipline is as a result of what's happened to us, the intermixing, you understand, with 6 ether into our genes, that keeps us from being successful. And we have to understand, well, you got to think. Sometimes you got to think. What did the ancient Egyptians do? When we were at our best and at our highest, what did they do? Well, you see that they were the master record keepers. We see that Tehuti was recording everything. Now we know that when we're looking at higher aspects of self, we know that our genes are obviously recording everything. So there's an aspect to it where we can work more efficiently. And one of the purposes sometimes for writing things down or recording things is because you need to give it to another person. So it's not even for self. It's in a sense of sometimes thinking for others and recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of where we're at now, understood in terms of our being, and putting in mechanisms so it doesn't cause us to falter when we're trying to achieve a particular objective. Any questions?
No current questions.
Okay. Now I have to get off at 4:30, so we've got 13 or so minutes to try and get through these last few sections. If I have to stop, because I want to go on to another meeting, but if we have to stop, then so we probably might drop a little bit of it if we feel we need to finish at the starting point of the natural ether class in 2 weeks' time. So we don't give not enough time to get proper understanding of some of these areas. We might take some of that section of that class just to finish this off, if that's okay with everybody. Now, so we've got these 9 different doctrines, and they are complex, but they're not designed to be kind of absorbed, I suppose, in one day. They're like they're supposed to open your mind to a new way of thinking, almost, and then we have to then do the work now to kind of master that which in that doctrine certain things have opened up, and they do challenge it. They're fantastic in challenging what things that we have been taught, or the way we see things, or the way we've been applying even moral judgments and things, and looking at things. Our perception of things being challenged by applying aspects of this doctrine, in certain aspects, but applying the doctrine in various different ways and then testing it out to see whether certain things work. So the one like that this Tehuti, you understand, or this Tehuti is given when we're dealing with the first one. So let's go back. So we've got doctrine of mental correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender, growth, and breathing. You understand? And then within those, you got various different, as I say, rules and observations that this Tehuti, being the culmination of all that, I suppose, sat in that seat, being this Amun Haktar that allows that vessel to connect with all of those observations, findings, so on and so forth, to allow that then to be amazingly given to us in a small form of book. But then, as I say, it's introducing you to certain concepts, and then it's for us to then put in the work now to take it from something that's written into something that's more practical by putting it to the test. Hence why we spoke about earlier. You can talk about ancestors all you want, but until you start, okay, well, I know who my grandmother is. I've got a picture of who's passed, or whatever. I need to start putting these things to the test and see if they work, and recording the outcomes and seeing what works, and etc. etc. So it's not just, is it mind's eye? There's an element of skepticism to it, or is this thing actually working? And you don't need to tell the world if it is working. You need to know, because you're seeking confirmation for self. Now we're speaking to other people, maybe of your race who are into something. You might say, hey, you might need to use this approach to solve a problem, or that approach, etc. This worked for me. Now, in a sense, it may help us to give other people more confidence to try certain things because of the way we have been indoctrinated against those things which we naturally at one time understood, used as part of our natural culture. So, doctrine of mental, mind your mind for the jewels of the soul. So many people, as I say, may be familiar with that term. So one of the things that's important to understand, because doctrine of mental, again, is one of the things that's significant, because and we pay maybe not enough attention to it. Insofar as, and I don't mean when we say not enough attention to it, I think we know it exists, but have we really done the work to take advantage of what that power really has to offer? Because when we showed you the diagram of the darkness, yeah, and its relationship to light, so if you imagine everything that sits behind that darkness, overstood, is mental. So there's an overwhelming amount of power that is sitting there for us to access to solve problems in the light. So the question is, why are we so weak? Why does this why does this world seem to, for a few people, maybe they've mastered certain aspects of things of self and they're expressing it, and that may result in whatever monetary rewards, other types of rewards, which has made them wealthy again, in a sense, or have certain monetary power, which, let's be honest, if we track back what's happened, we were born under the gold, the diamonds, and other precious mineral stones, whatever the case may be. So therefore, nature didn't intend us to be poor. Nature intended us to be wealthy and rich. So if you're thinking, well, why are they not intervening in the way in which this biblical thing where we're expecting somebody to fly out the heavens and, you understand, take the devil out, all these different forces, etc., supposed to be taking them out in one swoop, and it's not happening yet? We've got to think, well, is it that we've already been empowered to do what's necessary to free ourselves, and we're just not doing it? We're not accessing it. We're not, for some reason, we just turn the key in it. Turn the key and open the door and go through. That's how easy it is for freedom. But we're not doing it for some reason. We're not unlocking. They say, well, to get into, I think one quote in the Bible is in the New Testament, it's easier to go through the eye of a needle or whatever to make it to the kingdom of heaven. You understand what I'm saying? But actually, now you think of it now, if you're transmuting, using the power of transmutation, which is one of these keys in these 9 doctrines when dealing with the mental, well, actually, if I put one of my cells through the eye of a needle, it's quite easy to go through the eye of the needle. So is it easier than that to get into heaven? Because I put one of my cells in, I've gone through the eye of a needle. You understand what I'm saying? So that's you, because that's all of you is contained within one cell in the nucleus, in your nuclear DNA. Contains all aspects of who you are, you understand, in that regard. So it can go through the eye of a needle in that regard. So it's understanding these things in a different kind of way. Now, the point is that the doctrine of, when you're dealing with fa'ut, obviously all expanding, and then you have par fa'ut, so the all expanding. The all is within all, understood? So when we talk about the mental is being associated with the all, and that is contained within the many different universes, and we spoke about in part 1 the significant sizes of these various different universes, and how they in themselves are living entities understood within existence, and represent, at least in that regard, an aspect of mental, what we're calling mental. And then we are then interacting with it, or drawing down or downloading information from it in the form of our mind. Now, bearing in mind, I say, the vast expanses of a universe and the amount of power that one can draw from it, when we start to understand how to access that better, there is and then start looking into the darkness. So sitting behind that darkness, or the world of quantum physics, is the power of mental. And then within the quantum world, that which is seemingly impossible physically becomes possible in the darkness, or that quantum world. Understood? Because how it's manipulated is going to only be manifest itself, or it's shaped here in the physical. If you're able to manipulate something, obviously at a quantum level, understood, the rules don't apply in the same way. Like quantum entanglement, for example. Quantum entanglement says that basically, if I affect one particle in a certain location, they could be 10 trillion miles away from each other. The corresponding particle to that could be 10 trillion miles away. What I do to that particle instantaneously is going to, the same response is going to affect that same particle irrespective of time and distance. So when you start playing in that type of arena or field, that which is possible, that was impossible, becomes possible. And you, as a melanated individual, have access to that power of mental, because your correlation, obviously, in terms of your melanated design and your etheric vibrational rate, how it pertains to the 9 endocrine glandular systems, and your ability to transmute between those different levels of vibration, allows you access to the full aspect of that mental reservoir. Nothing is hidden from you in that regard, but it's something that we have to work through. So our understanding of the all as it applies to the mental, or Pa'ut, is represented, as we see here, in the universe, or the universe that we reside within, and which are, there are many. Understood? You understand? And then all of that, remember, is sitting within Fa'ut, or all, within existence. Understood? So there are aspects within that doctrine of the mental that we need to sit upon, as I say, and consider and master when we're looking at, as I say, how certain things are made up. And it starts with the mind first. We say it a lot, we express it a lot, but are we doing things actually with that mental thinking first? And this is why when they talk about us invoking or starting spiritually, or you start with a prayer, or these types of, do we know what we're doing when we're doing that in practical terms? I'm talking, because what you're doing in terms of starting with that, what you're doing is you're aligning the mind, or you're trying to point it in a direction. Loosely, I'm using the word direction, but you're putting it in a place where you're now connecting with the highest form of mental force, unpolluted, understood, to then whatever you're then enacting can have help to be successful. You're plugging in, so to speak, understood, but making sure it's being plugged in the right direction, in the sense that you are at that vibrational rate in order to deliver your best endeavors. Understood? In masonry, they say, oh, well, no act is basically done without invoking the power of the Most High. So when you take that back, understood, to where it needs to be today, it's talking to us in a sense of saying, well, actually, this aspect of things, before I engage in action, I'm going to control the mental power first, draw it down, channel it, and manage it to a point where whatever I need to then achieve, understood, I'm always managing the mental aspect of it, because I know as I bring it down, it must manifest itself into the physical. So understanding those transitions is what the doctrine, I suppose, of mental to some degree is trying to seek to teach us. So we have to understand that we're only a 9-dimensional being, as far as we have 9 aspects to ourselves, but principally those are the 3 kind of fold, isn't it? It's our soul, the spirit, and obviously the human body, which we need to manage all 3 when we're undertaking to do something. The 3-fold aspect of self, understood, which is giving us a window into what we're doing Okay, I can probably do one more. I'm already behind time where I need to be. So I need to be somewhere else in a sec. So I'm not going to let that affect you on the call. So we'll finish with this, and let's say probably continue in about 2 weeks' time. So I just want to touch upon this, and then we've got something to do with the ethics, which I just want us to go through a few aspects of that as well. So the doctrine of correspondence, and it says that which is above is the same as that which is below, and both are in Pa'ut, so which is all expanding. Yep. For those who don't understand what that translation is. So the power of this is that, and I'll touch on it in a little bit and probably continue with it in the next part. But the power of this is to understand, and we have it different ways as well. So in space and out space are the same, Nuwapians. The rules of in space and the rules of outer space are exactly the same. So the doctrine of correspondence is very powerful for us as Nagarnadu or Negroids, insofar as being able, because it's not everything that one can experience, and so you need your reasoning ability to be able to use the doctrine of correspondence to seek confirmation or achieve confirmation of certain things where you might not be able to be there physically, or you can't see something, or you can't, as say, maybe recognize it or achieve it with your senses. And so there are many things, for example, like if you see how they use maybe the doctrine of correspondence insofar as geometry. So geometry pertains to, as in the word geo, a metric, it pertains to measurements that pertain to Earth, correct? But scientists are able to use that geometry, for example, and use it to measure the distance of stars which are, you understand, millions of light years away, for example, you understand, and the distance output, what stars are shaped, look like, so on and so forth. So they're using geometric evidence that only relate to this particular planet, understood? And so the power of correspondence is being able to almost prove certain things that it can be used to prove certain things that maybe you can't see or perceive directly with your senses. And this is why it's important for us also to understand patterns and correlations within nature. Hence, some of that is reflected in what we talk about when we say ontology. Some of that is reflected in what we say as numerology, because you're looking for patterns in nature. Understood? Now, one of the things in relation to that is that when you're dealing with the doctrine of correspondence, it obviously relates to the fact that it's various different planes. So when you talk about a plane is moods of vibrational energy which are basically shaped in or within a system or unique shapes and forms. A mood itself is an expression of vibration. So if you imagine, the mood is the expression of vibration, and then when it's in, as I say, some kind of like system, a unique form or system, then it gets described as a plane. So it could be unique in its shape, or it's that those vibrational energies are in a unified form. That's what makes it a plane. Understood? And so understanding the correlation between planes, so let's say, for example, as above, so below, you're understanding, for example, that, as we talked about earlier in relation to the doctrine of the mental, what I perceive in my mind, isn't it? Yes, must manifest itself in the physical plane. Yeah? So as above, so below is not about direction. Understood? It's not about up. There's no real up or down. We're on a planet, on a globe that's moving through this circular universe. What is up and what is really down? So it's not talking about direction. Yes? Because in reality, not to confuse the situation, we're not moving anywhere. Or you're not moving anywhere, because you as the individual are always at the center. So it's not a directional situation, in a sense. It's basically the relationship between, say, different types of energy and how it relates to here, the grossest form of energy, as we find it today at least, called matter, where we are on the physical plane. Understood? So we just looked at one of those rules of the mental to say how that manifests into the physical. Now, if things are not manifesting in terms of us having a focused idea or vision, it's because oftentimes, maybe our level of concentration is not right, or understanding you can't just have the mental alone. You've got to put work in on the various different planes as it transitions through. So basically, if mental is 4, for example, on the plane, and then you go to the spiritual plane, which is your kind of blueprinting, your planning section, so on and so forth, and then you go to the plane of force. So basically, you need to put plane of force where the weather and things are controlled from. So you need to put a certain amount of momentum, energy, focus in the sand. Now that might represent money in this society in some people's thinking, but actually money can be a result. Sometimes it's needed to open certain doors. It's just a force, isn't it? It's just a force. When you peel back what sits behind it, you understand, it's a force. So understanding how it's used, get it, so on and so forth. And then you have to do things to build it in the material plane. Once it's built, then it needs to be maintained. So understanding how these things work and then deploying them in a way that reflects the rules of this doctrine, understand, helps us to have it much more focused and put it to the test to see whether things work. Understood? So what you've got to start to do, or what we've got to start to do as a people, and some people may already be doing it, but you've got to have enough trust in what your ancestors did, based upon the fact that the evidence is that they achieved a certain level of success. And so based upon that, that is why you're going back in the past. So you're replicating that in this day and time and saying, okay, boom, they mastered this, they created that, they created this. Let me now replicate that into this day and time and put it to the test to see if that works. Someone can only teach you so much of that. You've now got to put it into practice and then prove it, and then you become the master. You understand? And then you're able to teach others. Say, hey, yeah, I proved it. Yeah, it's really easy. You do this, and this. You understand? Until the point where we're doing it so much, when the children are then born, it's just second nature for us to teach. Yeah, this is how that works. This is how this works. This is how you make that manifest. Instead of putting things to what is described as chance. You understand? Yeah? What is described as chance, because it's not chance that's taking place. You know? And in one of the other doctrines, yeah, really it's saying that chance is just where things are happening, but the rules that pertain to it are unknown. So we're calling it chance, but it's because we don't understand the rules that were governing or arised that led to that situation manifesting itself. Understood? So when we get into, maybe in part 2, we'll get into the ethics and move into that detail and that, and we'll start to put these things together. But as things stand at the moment, we've come to our time and we need to close out today. So we'll go into this in a bit more detail. To be fair to everybody, I know people will be like, man, you only covered it properly. So we'll get into that at the start of the Natural Ether class. I'm not going to advertise it like that. Usually on the call, you'll know, and then we'll get into that. It'll probably take us maybe about 90 minutes to do a bit of justice, and then just finish that and then go into the ethics. There's a few things we need to just look at in terms of why the master, or how the master's doing certain things. So he's almost having to correct, at the same time teach you the why, and then say, okay, well, we're living by these particular rules, or we're going to deploy these particular ethics, but this is the rationale and the reason for how we arrived at that point. You understand? Because it's almost like everything that we learned had to be washed away. You understand? Had to be deaded. You know what I mean? Gotten rid of. Understood? And that's why you went through those first 30 years. It was getting rid of or addressing through what was considered to be true, but it was a thing to get rid of all of the inconsistencies there, and then it moves you to a point of right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding, which there's no rules, because a God doesn't have rules. There's no rules, no morals other than what you dictate for yourself. And then, as I say, when you move into the position now of getting back into your own stuff now in the hereafter doctrine and into the thereafter doctrine, we're now understanding why rules are necessary. Because rules obviously govern the environment. And then now, for us to have peaceful coexistence amongst each other, we may put certain things in that we are going to agree with to maintain that peace. Understood? So I'm not going to sleep with somebody else's wife because the doctrine of mine that we have created amongst ourselves means that men and women kill each other over this thing called love. So we're understanding our own nature in the context of all these different rules, whatever, genes and so on and so forth. We understand those rules, so we agree to live by a certain code or ethics, which we have to design. The more we do it, the more we live it, the more we put it into the morphic field, the more it becomes a way of life, a natural way of life, because that's what we're doing. We're living and maintaining those highest standards. So let's park for today. And any burning questions that we need to close on? Any burning questions?
Rather than a question, there's an outstanding contribution, a comment from Adorna, and it says, yes, it is an uphill struggle for our race to redirect our lives to what and who we are supposed to be because of the order of this world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your comment. And the point that, we didn't know where the attack was coming from insofar as inside of our own bodies, insofar as the interception within our genes. So to truly clean the race, individuals have to clean themselves inside out and outside in. You understand? And the key is for us is to raise our vibrational level to the 7, 8 and 9 ether ranges, and then we cannot be attached or touched by those lower forces. Holistically raise. You understand? This is one of the outcomes that's necessary and needed, but it requires mastery of everything. You understand? Because I say you can't build a temple to do certain rituals if you ain't got money. You understand? If you haven't got a workforce, power, skills, all these different types of things. So as we start to look, all of these planes that we're looking at in an esoteric sense or reading about, it all hangs together. But we've got to deploy the solution using our stuff, in a sense, so that we can develop that spiritual, esoteric strength in self, as I say, to deal with and overcome that which is affecting us physically. Do you understand? And kind of one of the key things of that is not being in need. We're going to get into that in the next class. I'm going to keep going on, but living for and by one another, that is one of our protections. Yeah, to enable us to stay vibrating at those higher ranges or levels of ether. But so we're going to those 9 doctrines in the next class. I've got to go. I'm already late for this next session. Tau Tak for everybody, or Tau Kum, I should say. Thank you all for joining us on today's session. Hopefully you found it, hopefully, I can't get rid of that 6 ether word out of my vocabulary, but you may have found it useful today, and we will continue it next week to finish that off, but we are going also into natural ether energy, a bit of a complex subject for some. And so that should be interesting for the 2 parts that we're dealing with in October. So as I say, if you join us for the first time today, check out this class when it comes on the YouTube channel and many of the other classes that we've delivered today. Check out the Facebook page or the YouTube channel to get access to more information about Wu-Sabat, the organisation, so on and so forth. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time as always, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Take care and give care.